Chapter 95. Wow. This was a cry that was suppressed from the bottom of her heart. Ah. This was a scream that was hidden deep in her throat. At this moment, the Givenchy store was completely silent. Whether it was the other sales ladies, Fang Minute, or Zheng Yujie, they all stopped chatting and became quiet. Their attention was attracted by Poplar Fruit, who had just changed his clothes and walked out of the changing room. So handsome. How come he looks like a completely different person after changing his clothes? The saying clothes make the man, and Buddha makes the man was vividly reflected on Poplar Fruit. Previously, when Poplar Fruit was wearing a loose and wrinkled casual outfit, he looked like a middle-aged uncle who had just finished his meal and was going out to enjoy the cool air. No one wanted to take a second look at him. But now, after changing his shirt and trousers, he looked a lot more refreshed. The fashionable and slim-fit shirt showed off Poplar Fruit's thin but well-defined body. Although the black trousers were not paired with bright leather shoes, it did not prevent Poplar Fruit from showing off his extraordinarily long legs. Poplar Fruit's face was not particularly handsome, but it was the kind of face that was more attractive the more you looked at it. His face was very chiseled, as if it was carved by a knife and an axe. Perhaps because he had lived in the countryside since he was a child, he was born with a light bronze complexion, which made him look very masculine. Especially his eyes, which were as deep as the starry sky, made people unable to look away. For a moment, the women in the store could only stare at him, speechless. "How is it? Do I look good?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Bien, très bien. Bravo, bravo," exclaimed a tall, burly foreign old man, accompanied by a short, Asian-looking young woman, clapping his hands as he walked through the door. The foreign old man's loud voice also woke the women up. They all turned their heads to see who this person was. The first one to react was Fang Minute. She pulled the corner of her clothes, hurried forward, and said respectfully, "Hello, Mr. Artil. I didn't notice you were here. I'm really sorry." The short young lady looked at the old foreigner named Artil and said something in her mind. It was French. Among the people present, perhaps only Poplar Fruit could understand it. It turned out that this young lady was a translator. She had just translated Fang Min's words for Artil. Artil said something with a smile. After the young lady finished listening, she turned to Fang Minute and translated, "You don't have to apologize. You are doing a good job by greeting the guests. I came here on a whim." Artil said a few more words, and the young girl translated, "I want to talk to your guest. Please don't mind." Fang Minute hurriedly stepped aside and said with a smile, "I don't care." "Why would I care? It's our honor to have Mr. Artil personally guide us in our work." The young lady translated Fang Min's words, but Artil didn't say much to her. He went directly to Poplar Fruit and said, "Hello, young gentleman. I'm a designer in Givenchy. It's an honor to meet you." Poplar Fruit reached out to stop the young lady who was about to translate for him. He nodded to her with a smile and said, "You don't have to translate for me. I can understand." He looked at Artil, whose hair was a little gray but still energetic. He reached out his hand with a smile and said to him in French, "Mr. Artil, nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too. Let me introduce myself. My name is Leon, Poplar Fruit. My Chinese name is Poplar Fruit. I'm currently a translator." Poplar Fruit's French was very fluent. If one closed their eyes, perhaps no one would be able to tell that such fluent French was spoken by a non-native speaker. Zheng Yujie and the young female translator were all shocked by what they had seen. Zheng Yujie knew that Poplar Fruit didn't only know English, but she didn't expect that Poplar Fruit could speak other languages so well. Artil was also shocked by Poplar Fruit's spoken language. He praised sincerely, "Mr. Leon, your French is very standard." Why did he praise him like that? Because Artil's French wasn't as standard as Poplar Fruit. There were also dialects in French. For example, Poplar Fruit's French was like Mandarin to Chinese. It was the authentic official French pronunciation. In Ba, not a typo, all the French people born and raised in France pronounced it this way. Artil, on the other hand, was probably born in Normandy. His accent was thick with the tone of the Norman dialect. He asked curiously, "Mr. Leon, are you a Chinese who grew up in France?" Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Thank you for your compliment. I didn't grow up in France, and I haven't been to France, although I've admired it for a long time. Then you must go and have a look in the future. France is a beautiful and romantic country, Artil said with emotion. You've never been to France, but you can speak French so well. It's really amazing. You're flattering me, Poplar Fruit said modestly. It's all thanks to my teacher. He's a very good language teacher in Paris. The online friend he used to practice speaking was indeed a language teacher, and his French was very pure. However, Poplar Fruit didn't know if he was good at teaching his students. The two of them chatted happily. Zheng Yujie also pulled Fang Minute aside and whispered, "Who is this foreigner? He's a very good designer. His full name is Artil Giovanni. Givenchy is a member of the family that founded Givenchy. Although he's not the chief designer, he's in charge of the men's apparel in Asia. He's also a big boss." Fang Min's voice was very low. "That's amazing." Zheng Yujie covered her mouth and exclaimed in a low voice. Back to the topic, Artil said to Poplar Fruit seriously, "Mr. Leon, I don't know if you're interested in being a model. You're the tallest and most Asian man I've ever seen. If you're willing, I can make you the most attractive Asian male model in the fashion industry." Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment. Only then did he understand that the old man was interested in his appearance. He pondered for a moment, looked at Artil, and said with a smile, "Mr. Artil, you're flattering me. I'm really grateful for your appreciation, but I like my current life very much. I don't want to enter the modeling industry." "That's a pity," Artil sighed regretfully, and then said, "You're really good. If you become our model or even our spokesperson, Givenchy's men's clothing will definitely be popular all over Asia." "Haha, Mr. Artil, you're exaggerating," Yonghua laughed. "Givenchy is a century-old brand. It's not because of models, but because of design masters like you. Givenchy has always insisted on the 4G design concept of genteel, grace, gaiety, and Givenchy, which refers to the gentlemanly style of the founder of Givenchy. I think that's the key to Givenchy's success." Most of what Yonghua said was based on the information she had read about Givenchy in the past. However, flattery won't get through. Yonghua's compliment had struck a chord in Givenchy's heart. The happiest thing for Givenchy was that there was someone who could agree with the fashion concept his idol uncle had established when he single-handedly founded this big brand. "I didn't expect you to know so much about Givenchy," Artil smiled happily. "I've talked to a lot of Chinese people. They know the latest fashion trends very well, but they don't care about the classics. You're really good." To be honest, he didn't care about fashion, and he didn't know what the so-called classics were. The reason he could speak so fluently was that he had read a lot of French information on the internet, many of which introduced the fashion industry that French people were most proud of. As a result, he had memorized a lot of other people's comments and research on Givenchy. Poplar Fruit hadn't spoken French for a while. It was rare for him to meet a Frenchman, so he took the opportunity to chat with him. Therefore, he racked his brains to search for information about Givenchy in his memory to cater to Artil's topic. "Mr. Artil, I've always been interested in the story of how Mr. Givenchy easily turned the situation around when he was attacked by many famous fashion brands from Italy in the 1950s. I can't find any news about that on the internet anymore. Can you answer my questions?" Yonghua asked. "Yes, Mr. Artil," Yonghua said. "Of course, no problem. It's like this, at that time." The more Artil talked, the happier he became. Looking at his beaming face, in his mind, the friendship between Mr. Givenchy and Ms. Audrey Hepburn was the most important turning point of Givenchy's fame in the world. Therefore, when talking about this matter, Artil seemed to have endless things to share with Poplar Fruit. The two of them chatted for more than 10 minutes before Artil remembered that Poplar Fruit wanted to buy clothes. He took Poplar Fruit's hand and insisted on customizing a suit for Poplar Fruit. Yonghua felt very honored to be chosen by a fashion designer from Givenchy. However, time waits for no one. Artil seemed to want to do everything by himself, from the design to the tailoring. Yonghua had to tell him that the suit would be used tomorrow, and it was too late to order it. She had no choice but to tell him that the suit would be used tomorrow. Artil sighed. He also knew that according to his meticulous character, He would never allow his work to be done so easily. Therefore, he had to give up. However, he still did it himself, looking for clothes for Poplar Fruit. The 7 employees in the store, including Fang Minute, were all ordered by him. One set of clothes after another was taken out from the inner warehouse. Although Poplar Fruit was dazzled by the variety of clothes and thought that every one of them was very good, Artil was still not satisfied. Chapter 96. As the manager of a big store, Fang Minute was not an embroidered pillow. She rolled her eyes and came up with an idea. She pulled the female interpreter aside and asked her to translate for her. Mr. Artil, your award-winning suit design from 3 years ago is on display in our store. We have also prepared some samples for customers to try. Would you like to take them out and try them on? Yes, take them out quickly. Artil's eyes lit up. He urged Fang Minute to take them out eagerly, but he was a little worried. Are there any suitable ones? Among the clothes that he had just tried on, there were not many that were suitable for Poplar Fruit's figure, and they were not what Artil wanted. This was one of the reasons why Artil was a little unhappy. The new suit was one of Artil's proudest works. Artil, who had been immersed in Asian fashion design all his life, had won the Golden Scissors Award in the Bali Fashion Show 3 years ago with the design of this suit. This was also the first time that Asian fashion designers had stood at the top of the world in a top suit design competition. It was a big breakthrough that even the industry insiders were in awe of. This suit was not fancy, just like the calm and introverted character of Asians. Its design was more retro, but it was not just a classic. It had its own great breakthrough. The special dark pattern on the leader's mouth made the whole suit look very youthful and fashionable. The overall simple design was not simple. It was a bit like Sir Chiao's iPhone. There was no complicated design, but everyone who picked it up could clearly feel its elegance. Poplar Fruit liked it at first sight. He was not a person who liked to show off, and the low-key pattern design was very beautiful. What was more fortunate was that there was a set of samples that matched Poplar Fruit's size very well. After trying it on, Poplar Fruit was satisfied. Except for a little flaw at the trouser leg and the waist, everything else was perfect. Poplar Fruit did not care. The trouser leg could be made shorter, and the waist was a little loose, which was within the tolerable range. But for the extremely picky Artil, this flaw was intolerable. He gestured with his hand as he shook his head. He still felt that this suit was a little outdated. After all, it was his work from 3 years ago. However, he didn't have a better choice at the moment. Artil looked at him for a long time and nodded reluctantly. However, Artil didn't give the suit to Poplar Fruit just like that. He took the suit from Poplar Fruit, who had just changed his clothes. After saying that, he buried his head in the tailoring room. Let me help you change it. It can be made even better. Poplar Fruit and the others looked at each other, then sat down and waited for Artil to change his clothes. Although it would take some time, Yanghua still admired Artil's perfectionist attitude very much. In fact, when he was working as a translator, he was also like this. Hugging Kiki, Zheng Yujie poked Poplar Fruit's waist with her finger and whispered, "Poplar Fruit, do you know that you've struck gold?" What do you mean? Poplar Fruit took a piece of tissue from the table next to him, took Kiki from Zheng Yujie's arms, and lovingly wiped the watery saliva from the corner of her mouth. Do you know who that old man is? Zheng Yujie asked teasingly. In order to make his daughter sleep more comfortably, Poplar Fruit moved his left and right hands to find the most suitable position to hug her. Then he said, "I know. Isn't he a designer of Givenchy? Is he very good?" Zheng Yujie saw that he was absent-minded, and she really wanted to give him a good knock on the head. Of course he's very good. His surname is Givenchy. He's the chief designer of Asia. He's a descendant of Givenchy? Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. Not a descendant, but almost. Anyway, he's from that family, Zheng Yujie said. That's still very good. He's the chief designer of Asia, Poplar Fruit said. Yes, you're very good. Zheng Yujie patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and said with a smile, "You actually got the recognition of a great designer, and he even rushed to cut clothes for you. That's a big honor. I'm just a person with a platinum card, and I'm not even qualified to meet him." Poplar Fruit teased her. What kind of platinum card do you have? You can't even find a platinum card. Zhang Yujie raised her eyebrows and glared at him. She gritted her teeth and said, I don't know which bastard stole my card. If I find out, I'll definitely strangle him to death. Time passed quickly as they chatted. After a while, Artil came out with the clothes with a smile on her face, and insisted that Poplar Fruit change into them. After Poplar Fruit changed into the clothes and walked out, he touched his chin and said proudly, It seems that I'm old, but my eyes haven't. They are still very accurate. He didn't use any tools just now. He measured the size of Poplar Fruit's clothes with just his eyes and hands. Not a bit more, not a bit less. Poplar Fruit put it on, and it fit him perfectly. The small flaw just now disappeared without a trace. Mr. Artil, you're really good. Poplar Fruit praised sincerely. There's an old saying in China that there's always a master in every profession. You're the master in the fashion industry. Artil smiled and said, You're flattering me. When it was time to pay the bill, Zhang Yujie took out a card. Poplar Fruit didn't let it go. He pressed her hands hard, then blocked her behind him and said, I have money. Why do I need you to pay for the clothes? Zhang Yujie pouted. She was very unhappy, but also helpless. Poplar Fruit took his card and walked to the cashier, only to be told that his clothes were free of charge. He turned around in surprise and saw Artil walking up to him with a smile on his face. Artil smiled and said, Mr. Leon, although this is the first time we've met, it's really nice to meet you. Take this set of clothes as a gift from me. How can I accept this? Poplar Fruit said, I can't accept it. This set of clothes is too expensive. Yes, it was really too expensive. Poplar Fruit had just glanced at the sample on display in the window. The price tag on it was more than 30,000 yuan. How can our friendship be measured by money? I designed and modified this suit. It's the best gift for a close friend. Please don't care about the price tag. It's just a number. The most important thing is the thought, said the old man, Artil, with his eyebrows furrowed and his eyes wide open. What he said is so reasonable that I have nothing to say. Poplar Fruit didn't know why such a thought popped up in his mind. He really couldn't think of any reason to refuse this lovely French old man. Perhaps his pursuit of art was where his self-worth lay. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to accept this expensive gift. However, in return, Poplar Fruit promised Artil that when Poplar Fruit had time, he would cooperate with Artil and let him design a set of clothes. After receiving Poplar Fruit's contact information, Artil smiled happily like a child. He said that if Poplar Fruit was willing to come, he would give him the best price. If Poplar Fruit couldn't go abroad, he could even live in Yangcheng for a while. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said, Don't talk about money. Mr. Artil, you said that we are friends. This is just the support between friends. Artil smiled and said, Of course, of course. The money is paid by Givenchy. If you don't accept it, you're not saving money for me, haha. After saying goodbye to Artil, Poplar Fruit walked out of Givenchy's store with Zhang Yujie, holding Kiki, who had just woken up, and carrying a large garment bag. Zhang Yujie suddenly patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder from behind. The sound of Poplar Fruit's muscles popping startled Kiki, who was still sleepy. She was startled. She put her arms around her father's neck and looked at him for a long time, but she still didn't understand what was going on. Poplar Fruit looked back at Zhang Yujie. Her right hand was stretched out, and her slightly red lips, which were covered with lipstick under her sunglasses, moved slightly. She said, Give it to me. Poplar Fruit knew what she was referring to. He hesitated for a moment, but still handed the garment bag to her. Although it was really not a problem for Poplar Fruit to hold Kiki and this small amount of clothes at the same time, he didn't want to refuse Zhang Yujie's kindness. From the moment they met until now, she had wanted to help Poplar Fruit many times, but Poplar Fruit wouldn't let her. Although she appreciated his kindness, if she kept pouring cold water on him, no matter how warm her heart was, it would still be cold. In order not to alienate her, Poplar Fruit asked Zhang Yujie to help him carry this light and large bag. Now that the two of them were walking together, with Kiki, who was hanging around her father's neck like a koala bear, it felt like a family going shopping. Along the way, they attracted a lot of attention, but Poplar Fruit didn't notice. He just laughed and teased Kiki, teaching her how to call him daddy. Chichi would smack her lips for a while, and then she would grin and giggle for a while. Poplar Fruit was a little worried that she would want to drink milk when she woke up, so he couldn't help but walk faster. Zheng Yujie carried the large garment bag and walked step by step to Poplar Fruit's left. However, she was half a step slower than Poplar Fruit. She looked at him with a bit of bitterness in her eyes as she listened to him and Kiki's laughter. She felt a little unhappy and didn't know why she felt sad. As they walked, Zheng Yujie suddenly grabbed Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit turned around to look at her in confusion. Although Zheng Yujie was wearing sunglasses, Poplar Fruit could still feel the cold light from her golden lenses. Her face was tense, and her lips were slightly pursed. He could see that she was gnashing her teeth. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but shiver. Why was she so angry? Chapter 97. Zheng Yujie was about to get goosebumps. However, the target wasn't Poplar Fruit. Following Zheng Yujie's line of sight, Poplar Fruit saw a couple walking over from not too far away. The woman was beautiful and charming. Her clothes made her look very pure, like a college student who had yet to graduate. The man was tall and handsome, with a square face, thick eyebrows, and big eyes. His face, which should have been very masculine, was now full of flattery. His left hand was around the girl's waist, gently stroking up and down. The thumb and index finger of his right hand were holding a card, and under the ring finger of his ring finger, the card spun up and down. Xiaomeng, I'll buy you clothes, okay? Have you heard of Givenchy? It's the most fashionable brand in France. Look, I even have a platinum card. When the time comes, we'll be able to enjoy VIP treatment. We'll have a row of saleswomen bring you clothes to choose from. I guarantee you'll like it. Is that okay? Come, give Big Brother a kiss. Good girl. The man's voice came from afar, and Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie heard it clearly. Poplar Fruit noticed that Zheng Yujie's face had turned even darker. He was confused. Could this man be Zheng Yujie's boyfriend? Oh, it could be. He looked a little young, so he should fit Zheng Yujie's criteria for a partner. Well, although Poplar Fruit was so slow that he didn't realize that she liked him, he didn't know why, but he felt that this good friend of his liked young boys. Of course, Poplar Fruit had never thought of himself as a young boy. Perhaps it was because of Kiki's birth that he felt that he had aged a lot. Was this the legendary melodramatic plot of cheating being discovered? They were still whispering sweet nothings to each other, immersed in the sweetness of each other's ears and temples. They didn't react to the gazes of the people outside. They were about to pass by Yang Guo. Zheng Yujie had been holding it in for a long time, and finally exploded. She strode forward and twisted the man's ear with one hand. She roared like thunder, Zheng Timing. Ouch, ouch. The man struggled in pain when his ear was pulled, but when he heard Zheng Yujie's roar, his legs went soft, and he almost fell to his knees. He finally turned around, and his expression became even more flattering. Sis, you're here too. Good afternoon, good afternoon. Sis. Poplar Fruit realized that he was wrong. They both had the surname, so they might really be brother and sister. H, it's my fault. Zheng Yujie said coldly. Zheng Timing's ears were being twisted by Zheng Yujie, so he could only beg for mercy. Sister, let go of me first. Let's talk nicely. Can we talk nicely? Look, there are people watching. Don't make a fool of yourself. In the distance, one or two people turned their heads to take a look. However, when Zheng Timing said that they were outsiders, he was referring to Yang Guo and Chichi, who was in his arms. Kiki, who was hugging her father's neck, turned around and stared at Zheng Yujie's hand that was twisting Zheng Timing's ear. Poplar Fruit saw it and quickly covered her eyes. He couldn't let his daughter learn to be violent. It wasn't good to casually twist other people's ears. Zheng Yujie let go of her hand, but before Zheng Yujie could straighten up, she turned around and gave him a knock on the head. Zheng Timing hurriedly stood up and quietly took a step back to distance himself from Zheng Yujie. You've grown up, haven't you? Not only did you chase after girls, you even stole my card to show off. You've grown up, haven't you? Zheng Yujie put down the large bag and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She raised her head slightly and glared at Zheng Taiming. Zheng Taiming smiled embarrassedly. He moved to the side and hid the frightened Xiao Meng behind him. He didn't know how to respond. What's the point of using our family's money and your sister's card to chase after girls? If you have the guts, go earn it yourself. You're so extravagant when you're studying. See if I don't beat you to death. Zhang Yujie took off her sunglasses and glared. She raised her right hand and pretended to hit him. So Zhang Yujie's card couldn't be found because Zheng Taiming had secretly taken it to please her. Zheng Taiming was shocked when he saw that Zhang Yujie was about to hit him again. He quickly hid behind Xiao Meng and pressed his hands on Xiao Meng's shoulders, shrinking his head. A grown man actually relied on a woman to shelter him from the wind and rain. This younger brother of Zheng Yujie's was really something. Poplar Fruit was stunned. Zheng Taiming poked his head out from behind Xiao Meng and said guiltily, "Sis, don't hit me. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I won't do it again." Zhang Yujie scolded him harshly 2 or 3 times before her expression softened. She introduced Poplar Fruit and Zheng Taiming to each other. However, just like in the store, Zhang Yujie only introduced Poplar Fruit's name and didn't mention anything about their relationship. Seeing that his plan to go shopping and chase after girls was ruined, Zheng Taiming could only take out a few hundred yuan and shove it to Xiao Meng so that she could take a taxi back to school. After sending Xiao Meng away, Zheng Taiming followed behind Zheng Yujie with a long face, waiting for her judgment. Zheng Yujie ignored him. She treated Zheng Taiming, who was following behind her like a little tail, as air. She slowly talked to Poplar Fruit. As they chatted, Zheng Yujie suddenly stopped. She stood face to face with Poplar Fruit, with only Kiki between them. She put her left hand on Poplar Fruit's shoulder, then stood on her tiptoes and gently stroked Poplar Fruit's hair with her right hand. Zheng Taiming's eyes widened. What was going on? "Your hair is too long," Zheng Yujie said softly. Her eyes met with Poplar Fruit's, and her voice was so gentle that it was like a different person from when she was scolding Zheng Taiming just now. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Yeah, I haven't cut my hair for more than 2 months. In these 2 months, he didn't care about his hairstyle. It was good enough that he could wash his hair every day. That won't do. Go get your hair done. It's not good if it's too messy." Zhang Yujie felt the hormones in Poplar Fruit's breath, and her face was a little hot. She let go of Poplar Fruit's hair, and her eyes were a little afraid to look at Poplar Fruit. Zheng Taiming was a little dizzy. He started to wonder if he wasn't awake and pinched his face. It hurt, so he wasn't dreaming. But what was with his sister's action and expression? Was she still his sister when she was so shy? He had never seen his sister use such an expression to face a man. She even used her hand to stroke his hair from the top of his head to the back of his ears. Wasn't this action only between lovers? But this man was carrying a child. Could it be? Thinking about how his sister hadn't returned home for almost a year, Zheng Taiming felt like thousands of grass mud horses had stepped on him. It couldn't be what he thought it was, right? Zheng Taiming's forehead wrinkled so much that the wrinkles on his forehead were all twisted together. Poplar Fruit finally agreed to Zhang Yujie's arrangement. The 3 of them walked to a hair salon on the 9th floor. Zhang Yujie familiarly asked the very feminine hairstylist, Xiao Xiao, to design a hairstyle for Poplar Fruit. Xiao Xiao's eyes lit up when he saw Poplar Fruit. He pinched his orchid fingers and stroked the hair of Poplar Fruit, who was sitting on the chair. He coquettishly discussed with Poplar Fruit what hairstyle to give him. Enduring the disgust of being touched, Poplar Fruit glared at Zhang Yujie, who was secretly laughing at the side, and agreed with Xiao Xiao. Zheng Taiming was also looking at Zhang Yujie. He watched as Zhang Yujie hugged Kiki and teased her with a smile. He didn't know how to express the strangeness in his heart. Although there might be a problem with his sexual orientation, Xiao Xiao's craftsmanship wasn't just for show. He cut left and right, and the 2 small scissors were like butterflies flying up and down. Every time they stopped and flapped their wings, a few strands of hair would flutter down. This was also a person who had a persistent and even demanding pursuit of art. Although his movements were very fast, he would stop and look at it again after every dozen cuts. After washing the broken hair on his head, Xiao Xiao applied a hairstyling lotion on Poplar Fruit's hair. From time to time, he would take out the scissors and gently trim it. Finally, Xiao Xiao clapped his hands and put down the scissors. He took Poplar Fruit's arm and pulled him up. Then he pinched his orchid fingers with his other hand and pointed to the mirror. Half covering his mouth, he smiled and said, "Little brother Yang, look, isn't this hairstyle much better? It's really good." Poplar Fruit also sincerely praised himself. How should he describe it? Business style? Fashion style? None of them were suitable. Xiao Xiao didn't cut Poplar Fruit's most commonly used short hair. It wasn't the cool trendy hairstyle of the Korean celebrities either. Overall, it was still clean and refreshing short hair. The two sides of his temples were shorter, and the top of his head was slightly longer. However, the cut wasn't very thick. The hair was loosened and fixed with hair gel. It looked very sunny and fresh. However, there was still a short slanted fringe on his forehead. Together with Poplar Fruit's deep starry eyes, there was an indescribable devilish charm. "Kid, you're still very handsome." Poplar Fruit looked at himself in the mirror and was very satisfied. He also praised himself a little proudly in his heart. Which girl didn't like to be beautiful? Which guy didn't want to be handsome? Although he didn't have the habit of taking care of himself, it didn't mean that he didn't care. Zheng Taiming also realized that Poplar Fruit was very handsome after changing his hairstyle. Previously, when Poplar Fruit was carrying a baby in his arms, his gaze would always be involuntarily attracted to him. Now that he took a closer look, he realized that this man who might be having an affair with his sister was no ordinary person. At the very least, in terms of height and appearance, he was much more outstanding than himself. Poplar Fruit didn't want to fight with Zheng Yujie for the money for the hairstyle. Everyone was watching, and it wasn't good to argue. However, the price for the hairstyle in this kind of clubhouse wasn't low. Even though it was a VIP customer like Zheng Yujie, it still cost 1,666 yuan after a discount. This made Poplar Fruit speechless. To Poplar Fruit, with his current income, it wasn't that he couldn't afford such a service. However, as someone who grew up in the countryside, he had only cut hair in small salons that didn't cost more than 30 yuan for more than 20 years. This kind of extravagant lifestyle was too unreal. It was said that it was easy to go from frugal to extravagant, but difficult to go from extravagant to frugal. After enjoying an extravagant lifestyle, many people were unwilling to be poor. Even if they had to sell everything they had, even if they had to commit crimes, they still wanted to satisfy their desires. After experiencing such a seemingly carefree spending, although it wasn't his own money, could Poplar Fruit still maintain his pure heart? Who knew? Chapter 98. Night fell as scheduled. Poplar Fruit coaxed Kiki to sleep on the big bed. He took out his laptop and laid on the sofa in the living room to browse the web. He was making the final preparations for tomorrow's press conference. The curtains behind him had already been pulled open. The clean and transparent floor-to-ceiling glass was like a TV curtain wall. What was reflected on it was the beautiful night view of Beijing. Beijing's sky couldn't see the stars, but what was there to be regretful about? Looking at it, the neon lights were overflowing with color. It wasn't like the stars that couldn't be seen, but it was more dazzling. The slowly flowing river of light and the shining waterfall of light high up in the sky were like a painting of mountains and rivers drawn with light. It was so magnificent. Where there was light, there would be people gathering. Looking at the quiet old alley on the right, there was a glimmer of light, and sweaty hawkers were making the most famous snacks of old Beijing for the tourists who came from all over the world. Soy milk, fried tripe, fried liver, roast mutton, lamb scorpion, donkey rolls, scorched rice, rice snails, chestnut noodles, cornbread, and so on. There were many places with people. Huhai, Sanlitun, and various other bars were filled with a large number of naughty people. Under the flickering lights, they were cheering, playing, and rocking. These were the places where the grassroots stars started. They were here to painstakingly pursue their dreams of music. If they did well, who knows when they would be discovered by a talent scout from a talent show. Becoming famous overnight wasn't just a legend described in books, wasn't it? But these didn't have much to do with Poplar Fruit. After admiring the night view for a moment, He left the hustle and bustle and immersed himself in his quiet preparation. Poplar Fruit's personality liked peace and quiet. In places like bars and nightclubs, he always felt uncomfortable. When he was in Yangcheng, he didn't go to these places, let alone in Beijing, but when he wanted to quietly read for a while, things always went against his wishes. Not only that, there was a bang-bang knocking on his door. When he opened the door, he found that it was the young man he saw this afternoon, Zheng Yujie's brother, Zheng Taiming. Zheng Taiming was sweating profusely. He was standing at the door carrying bags of things like he was fleeing. His handsome hairstyle from this afternoon was messed up for some reason. Poplar Fruit held back his laughter and let him in. Zheng Taiming walked back and forth to the door twice before he finished carrying the things. This was with the help of Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was surprised to find that the things Zheng Taiming brought were all baby product. What was the meaning of this? Before Poplar Fruit could ask, Zheng Taiming complained, "I'm really a prince's body but a servant's life. I don't have pocket money to spend and have to run errands for my sister. Brother Yang, my sister asked me to buy these and send them over." Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he looked at the bags of imported milk powder that could last a few months. There were also all kinds of branded baby products. He had seen these things in the store before. They were extremely expensive, ranging from a few hundred to a few thousand. He waved his hand and said, "Zheng Taiming, you shouldn't have bought these things for me. This time I came to Beijing, I brought enough things. These are too expensive, I really can't accept them." "Hey, Brother Yang, don't refuse. Don't worry about whether it's expensive or not. It's not like you don't know my sister. She's a nouveau riche. She has nothing at home except for money. She would rather die than give me a little. I really don't know if my parents picked me up from the trash can. Why is the difference in treatment so big?" As he rambled on, Zheng Taiming realized that he had strayed off topic. He quickly returned to the topic at hand. "Anyway, just accept it. If you don't accept it, my sister will beat me up and say that I didn't treat you well." "She won't. Don't worry, I'll explain it to her. Take it back. Really, it's too expensive. Just a trip to Beijing and you're already spending so much money. I won't dare to come again next time," Poplar Fruit said. "It's better if you don't come," Zheng Taiming secretly said in his heart. However, he didn't dare to say it out loud. He laughed and said, "No way, Brother Yang. I worked so hard to bring it here and you want me to take it back? Moreover, these are all for children. I can't eat them if I bring them back. It's a waste to throw them away. Don't you think so? Just accept it." "Ari." Poplar Fruit sighed and helplessly said, "Forget it. Just put it down. I'll talk to your sister later." "Hehe, that's right. If there's anything, just tell my sister. It's hard for me to be stuck in the middle." "Oh right, Brother Yang, you have to help me say a few good words to my sister, for the sake of my hard work." Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "She still hasn't forgiven you?" "Yes." When she left, her face was still gloomy. "You don't know, but my sister's temper is very bad. Just a small matter and she would make a big fuss. That year, the Liu family's third son was smashed in the head by her with a beer bottle in a bar. It caused an uproar. In the entire Beijing courtyard, there's not a single child who hasn't been beaten by her." Zheng Taiming didn't know what he was thinking. He half-truthfully and half-falsely described his sister as a female demon. "Is it that exaggerated?" Poplar Fruit suspiciously asked. "I think she's a pretty good person. Ari, you haven't seen my sister when she was young. At that time, she was one of the 3 evil spirits in Beijing. That evil spirit was my sister. Us juniors weren't afraid of her. In the past few years, she has restrained herself a little but she's still fierce," Zheng Taiming said with a little fear. "Hee." Poplar Fruit didn't want to continue this conversation. He felt that it wasn't good to talk about others behind their backs. Moreover, he believed in his own eyes. What kind of person Zheng Yujie was, whether she was good or bad, he was confident that he could tell. Zheng Taiming saw that the effect wasn't obvious. He fiddled with a can of milk powder and rolled his eyes. When Poplar Fruit was pouring water for him, he pretended to casually say, "Big Brother Yang, why did you bring the child to Beijing? Why didn't you let your wife take care of the child at home? It's inconvenient to have a child by your side. His words were actually a trap. Zheng Taiming wanted to ask about Poplar Fruit's specific situation to determine if his sister really secretly had a child with someone else. He knew that Zheng Yujie was very self-centered since she was young. She was especially disgusted with the various political marriages in large families. It wasn't hard to imagine that she would do such a thing. Hihi, it's okay. Kiki has been by my side since she was born. Poplar Fruit replied. Zheng Taiming was stunned. Poplar Fruit avoided the important points and only answered one of his questions. However, the thing he wanted to know the most was ignored. Damn it, too cunning, Zheng Taiming said in his heart. In fact, Poplar Fruit wasn't so cunning. He didn't answer the question about Kiki's mother because he didn't want to tell the story of Wu Yu's death in childbirth to someone he wasn't familiar with. He also didn't want to waste his time explaining. However, Zheng Taiming didn't give up so easily. He talked about this and that and chatted with Poplar Fruit for a while. Then, he pretended to not care and asked, "Oh yeah, Big Brother Yang, how long have you known my sister? How come I've never heard her mention you?" "Oh, we've only known each other for 2 months. She's been so busy recently. She didn't have time to tell you about her work." Poplar Fruit kindly explained for Zheng Yujie. "Oh, I understand now." Zheng Taiming's heart was enlightened. They've only known each other for 2 months. Poplar Fruit's child is more than 2 months old. No matter how you look at it, it can't be considered as my sister's. Fortunately, if my sister was unmarried and had a child with another man, it would be a big scandal. This made Zheng Taiming breathe a sigh of relief. However, Zheng Taiming felt that things weren't so simple, because from Zheng Yujie's performance this afternoon, their relationship was definitely not as simple as friends and colleagues. Or even if the man in front of me didn't have such thoughts, my sister definitely had thought. Also, such a tall and handsome man, and I heard that he's very outstanding. Which woman wouldn't be tempted? But this can't be. First of all, this man already has a child. Maybe he's someone with a family. Secondly, what kind of person is my sister? She's the princess of a big family. Although she's not a direct descendant, she's also deeply liked by my grandfather. It can be said that her life's marriage fate has been planned. How can she mess around with others? Even if Poplar Fruit didn't have any thoughts now, Zheng Taiming didn't dare to be careless, because he knew that his sister was very beautiful, rich, and powerful. No man could refuse her pursuit. I can't let them develop like this, Zheng Taiming said in his heart. If it continues to develop, it'll be an ill-fated relationship. It's not good for anyone. Although Zheng Taiming was unrestrained in his love life, he knew the unspoken rules of the big clans like the back of his hand. Everyone enjoyed the benefits of the big clans, but everyone had to be a chess piece in the politics of the big clans. When necessary, they had to make sacrifices for the overall situation. He couldn't escape from it. He had been arranged to get married before he graduated from university. He had to get married after graduation. He hadn't seen the partner yet, and he had no feelings for her. But this was their life. Although Zheng Yujie was very strict with him, he still wanted to protect his sister who was directly related to him. He didn't want Zheng Yujie to go further and further on this wrong path. After considering his words, Zheng Taiming said, "It turns out that you have only known each other for such a short time. No wonder Brother Yang doesn't understand my sister's character, haha. But let me tell you, with my sister's bad temper, my brother-in-law will have a good time in the future." Zheng Taiming said, "Right, Brother Yang, you may not have seen my brother-in-law, right? He is also very handsome and gentle. He is my sister's childhood sweetheart. He was bullied by my sister since childhood. They just got engaged last year, haha." Poplar Fruit also laughed. There was an indescribable strangeness in his heart. It turns out that Zheng Yujie is engaged. But why is this kid telling me this? He is so outspoken and revealed his sister's scandal. If Zheng Yujie knew, she would beat him to death. Yes, if Zheng Yujie knew that Zheng Taiming was telling tales in front of Poplar Fruit, she would definitely beat him to death. What engagement last year? It was obviously under her strong opposition, and the engagement ceremony ended unhappily, okay? Sure enough, a younger brother is the most deceptive to his sister. Chapter 99. The press conference was held in the afternoon. In the morning, Poplar Fruit carried his daughter and took a taxi to Dongshin Publishing. He also pushed the baby stroller that Zhang Yujie had given him. Poplar Fruit planned to coax his daughter to sleep before going on stage. Then, he would let her sleep quietly in the stroller in another room and ask one of Zhang Yujie's female assistants to take care of her. The final arrangements were being made in the conference hall. As the only translator in the translation team to attend the press conference, Poplar Fruit was led by Zhang Yujie to meet with the editor-in-chief of Dongshin Publishing, Pang Yu. Pang Yu was the key person in introducing this book into China. Due to sect leader Qiao's careful planning, this biography strictly adhered to his confidentiality standards. This standard was so strict that the media did not get any data about the iPhone 4's shape and specifications before the press conference. Similarly, almost no one in the industry knew about the existence of this book. At the beginning of the year, a middleman secretly contacted Dongshin Publishing and asked if they were interested in importing this book. But when asked about the author, summary, and even publication date of this book, the middleman was tight-lipped and refused to reveal a single word. They did not know who the author was, nor did they know if the book was good or not. Importing such a book was a huge risk. Even Dongshin Publishing, which could import no less than 600 foreign language books every year, did not dare to be careless. Although there was the name of sect leader Qiao, Dongshin Publishing had already published no less than 10 books related to him. Although the sales were good, there were hidden dangers. For such a character who might have been overly discussed and researched, would his book still have any marketing value? No one dared to make this decision. The president, vice president, and editor-in-chief had a secret meeting to discuss it for a long time, but they could not come to a decision. In the end, Pang Yu gritted his teeth and suggested, "Let's take a gamble." Therefore, after some bidding, Dongshin Publishing won the only official biography of Steve Jobs. Even though he had obtained the book, the news was still a secret within the publishing house. Only a few people knew about it. At that time, Pang Yu was in charge of contacting the American publisher, Simon & Schuster. For this matter, he made 3 trips to the United States within 2 months. Even when it was time to recruit translators, the news had not spread. Even after that, the publication of this book had always been kept in a low-key state. Because of this confidentiality requirement, there was a story later on. When Pang Yu's father heard that the United States was going to publish sect leader Qiao's biography, he rushed home excitedly and suggested that Pang Yu quickly look into it. In the eyes of engineering students, Steve Jobs is the modern Edison and Da Vinci. In the end, he got the answer that Dongshin Publishing had already imported the Chinese version rights. He was very angry and questioned Pang Yu why he did not publicize it. He did not even wait for Pang Yu to explain before he left angrily. No matter what, Pang Yu definitely contributed a lot to the publication of this book by Dongshin Publishing. When he saw Pang Yu, Poplar Fruit realized that this masculine name belonged to a woman in her 50s. Her hair was a little white. Pang Yu was very enthusiastic about Poplar Fruit. She expressed her satisfaction with his translation to Poplar Fruit. "I've seen it. Whether it's your translation or your editing, the quality of the translation is very high. It can be said that this is the best book published by Dongshin in the past 10 years. Pang Yu smiled and said, "Our Xiaozheng did not waste his effort." Haha. Poplar Fruit was a little flattered to be praised by a big shot in the publishing industry. Although he was a little excited, he still replied humbly. As she was busy with work, Pang Yu did not chat with Poplar Fruit for too long. In the end, she said a few words of encouragement to Poplar Fruit. It's normal to encounter some setbacks in the publication of a book. As long as you can overcome them, nothing will be a problem. A capable person will not be afraid of other people's doubts. Only a person who is willing to face challenges can be considered a real powerhouse. Poplar Fruit, I'm very optimistic about you. A person of Pang Yu's status would not be bothered by a little bit of trouble. What kind of petty tricks had she not seen before? The reason why she did not interfere was because she wanted to use the opportunity to train Zhang Yujie, whom she viewed as her junior. From the looks of it, The results were pretty good. After Pang Yu left, Zheng Yujie whispered to Poplar Fruit. So you're from Xindar Company. Why didn't you tell me before? Her body was very close to Poplar Fruit, but her hand was holding onto Poplar Fruit's waist. Her thumb and index finger were clamping onto a piece of soft meat as she said angrily. This action was a bit too much. Even a slow person like Poplar Fruit felt that something was wrong. But according to his way of thinking, he first reflected on himself. Yesterday, he knew that Zheng Yujie was an engaged person. He was so close to Zheng Yujie and acted so intimately. Would it have a bad influence on Zheng Yujie? Poplar Fruit, who thought that he was very considerate, quickly distanced himself from Zheng Yujie and asked in surprise, "Hey, how did you know?" "But you're wrong," Poplar Fruit, who loved to argue with words, corrected her. "The relationship between Xindar Company and me is not employer and employee. I only take translation tasks through Xindar Company." After being avoided by Poplar Fruit, Zheng Yujie's eyes were a bit gloomy. She thought that the relationship between the two of them had become closer, but it seemed that things were not going as smoothly as she thought. However, Zheng Yujie quickly recovered as if nothing had happened. She smiled sweetly and said, "I know, I've heard about Xindar Company's business model. Yesterday afternoon, their president Yarrow stood up to support you, making me mistakenly think that you're working for him." "President Yarrow? Is it President Yarrow de Hua?" Poplar Fruit said in surprise. "What's going on?" After Zheng Yujie's explanation, Poplar Fruit understood that the storm of public opinion that had just erupted the day before yesterday was actually a decision made by Yarrow de Hua yesterday. He talked to a few big newspapers that he had a good relationship with, and a few of them were mouthpieces of Guangdong province. Through them, he conveyed his support for Poplar Fruit to the outside world. Poplar Fruit found a newspaper, and the one that he was looking at was the Nanyu Evening News, which was known for its bold words. On the 5th page, there was a huge headline, "Youth is not the measure of strength." The Nanyu Evening News analyzed the matter regarding Poplar Fruit from two angles. On the one hand, through interviews with Yarrow de Hua and other key employees of Xindar Company, Translation Department, he learned about Yang Guo's true capabilities. Just like what Yarrow de Hua said, Yang Guo is the most talented translator I've ever seen. I've been in this industry for decades, and I've never admired or even worshipped anyone as much as I do. He deserves to be called the #1 gold medal translator in our company. With his capabilities, even in the translation world of Guangdong province, including the long-established translators of the older generation, Yang Guo can squeeze into the top 10. On the other hand, by tracing back to the beginning of this matter, they raised a question. Those who follow the trend, are your evaluation standards still stuck at the superficial age, qualifications, and reputation? How many of you have read Poplar Fruit's translations? If you haven't read the books, why are you so sure that he's not good at translating? You can criticize him because of his youth, but in my opinion, youth is his biggest asset. Yang Guo has unlimited potential. With his current strength, I can boldly say that he is destined to become a master. Yarrow de Hua gave a very high evaluation that might even lead to controversy. Don't worry, Yang Guo has a lot of potential. Naturally, the Nanyu Evening News would not listen to Yarrow de Hua's words. They even found the most famous translator in Guangdong province through their own channels, the dean of the School of Advanced Translation of Guangdong Province's Foreign Studies University, Yuan Chenghe. Yuan Chenghe looked at the materials provided by the Nanyu Evening News that Poplar Fruit had translated for the pharmaceutical company. He also gave a high evaluation, excellent quality, amazing, and rare. Although his evaluation wasn't as exaggerated as Yarrow de Hua's, his appreciation and praise for Poplar Fruit was obvious. In the end, the Nanyu Evening News stood from a neutral point of view and concluded, Poplar Fruit's strength and the quality of Steve Jobs' translation, let the facts speak for themselves. But there's no doubt that youth shouldn't be the yardstick for everyone's evaluation. Because of the reports in Guangdong province, some unknown information about Poplar Fruit was revealed to the public. The situation on the internet had also quietly changed. The one-sided crusade weakened a lot, and more people chose to observe rationally. This also reduced the pressure on Dongshin Publishing's public relations department. There were countless people who added flowers to the brocade when they succeeded, and only when they were frustrated could they show their true feelings. Poplar Fruit was touched by Yarrow de Hua's support. Although his eyes were as calm as usual, his trembling hands couldn't hide his emotions. Poplar Fruit knew that Yarrow de Hua did not stand out to support him. Even if it was support, there was no need for him to go all out. By doing so, he brought a huge potential risk to himself and the company. Because if the quality of the translation after the release of sect leader Qiao's biography was as bad as everyone suspected, then Yarrow de Hua would really become a big joke in the industry. Even Cinder Company's reputation and image would suffer a blow. Yarrow de Hua said that Poplar Fruit was the #1 person in Cinder Company, the leader of the gold medal translators. If Poplar Fruit was criticized by the public because of the translation of this book, then Cinder Company's strength would also be questioned by the customers. The translation industry wasn't big, and the slightest news would immediately spread to everyone's ears, not to mention such a hot topic in the country. Poplar Fruit didn't feel pressured by Yarrow de Hua's trust in him. Instead, he seemed to be encouraged and became more confident. Chapter 100. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Poplar Fruit coaxed his daughter to sleep after eating lunch. The press conference was expected to last for 2 hours. Kiki usually slept for 2 to 3 hours at noon, so 3 hours was enough for her to sleep now. In the dressing room, Poplar Fruit changed into Givenchy's formal attire. He declined the makeup artist's suggestion to put on some light makeup as he was particularly resistant to makeup. Perhaps it was because of the trauma he had when he was a child. At that time, all the children in the kindergarten were covered in a thick layer of powder. He still remembered that feeling of disgust. Perhaps the makeup artist saw that Poplar Fruit's complexion was not bad and was easy to talk to, so he smiled and let him go. After changing into his attire, Poplar Fruit's charm soared. When he walked out, he became the focus of the entire preparation room, especially the young girls and female staff. It was as if Poplar Fruit was a magical magnet. Once their eyes were glued to him, they could not look away. "Who is he?" The girls whispered to each other in 2s and 3s. "I think it's that translator called Poplar Fruit," someone said proudly. "His Poplar Fruit. I didn't expect him to be so handsome." A few girls' eyes were almost curved into a heart shape. That's right. Don't you think he's so tall?" A few girls' attention was on Poplar Fruit's long legs. "I heard that it's most suitable for a boyfriend to be 18 centimeters taller than himself. He's the perfect Prince Charming. Handsome and tall. Hey, you're more than 18 centimeters, right? I think I'm the most suitable one. Hey, I don't think I can sleep tonight." A girl covered her burning face and said, "Xiao Yu, you perverted girl." Everyone laughed at her. A girl came over and giggled. "I say, don't even think about it. It's not your turn. I saw him carrying a child." "Ah, how can it be?" The girls had a look of disbelief. "He has a child at such a young age." After receiving the affirmation from their companions, the girls' hearts were broken. Why is it that every handsome guy we just met is already taken? This was just a small episode that happened in the corner of the hall. Poplar Fruit had no idea that he had become the topic of discussion of those girls. After Poplar Fruit came out, he stood beside Zhang Yujie and listened to her arrangements. Zhang Yujie had also changed into a neat business attire. She wore a white shirt with a laced collar and a tight black skirt suit. Her curvy figure looked even hotter in the suit. Poplar Fruit was no saint. His gaze involuntarily drifted to Zhang Yujie's buttocks. He thought that he had done it discreetly, but women had the strongest sixth sense. How could Zhang Yujie not notice Poplar Fruit's little trick? However, she didn't show it. Not only was she not angry, but she was also overjoyed. "I knew you weren't Liu Xiaohui." To be appreciated by the person she liked, Zhang Yujie's heartfelt smile at this moment was just like the old saying, "A woman dresses up for herself." The reporters who had been taken to lunch by Dongshin Publishing's Public Relations Department returned to the hall of the press conference. Under the guidance of etiquette, they found their seats in their own newspapers and sat down. There was an unspoken rule in domestic news reports. Even Dongshin Publishing was no exception. The pockets of the reporters who returned were bulging. They had received a lot of benefits. There were so many newspapers present, and most of them had some relationship with Dongshan Publishing. Many of them patted their chests and promised that they wouldn't make things difficult for Dongshan Publishing. Therefore, there was no tense atmosphere at the press conference. Instead, most of the people were talking and laughing, as if they were attending a tea party. Poplar Fruit looked backstage and shook his head, feeling strange. Don't worry. Zhang Yujie saw Poplar Fruit shaking his head and thought he was nervous. She squeezed his hand and said, "It's all according to the procedure. There won't be any problems." Poplar Fruit pulled his hand out of Zhang Yujie's soft palm, touched his nose, and said with a smile, "I'm not worried. It's just my first press conference. It feels a little unreal." Regardless of whether it was real or not, the press conference began as scheduled at 3:30 p.m. In addition to the protagonists Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie, there was also the president of Yin Yang Network, Chen Fuzong, and the editor-in-chief of Dongshan Publishing, Pang Yu. Pang Yu was still a little worried. She was mainly present to support Zhang Yujie. Professor Luo Lin, a senior translator from Beijing Foreign Studies University, was also on the rostrum. He was a senior translator. His most famous translations were Milton's Paradise Lost, Paradise Restored, Samson, and other famous works. He was also quite famous in the translation industry. Dongshan Publishing's press conference this time was different from ordinary press conferences. In order to make people more convinced, they arranged a live Q&A environment with Professor Luo and Poplar Fruit. It was more useful to let the professionals give the correct evaluation. After a simple introduction, the press conference gradually went on the right track. Various newspapers reached out their hands and asked their own questions. In the beginning, they asked more questions about the biggest star in the arena, Pang Yu. Chief Editor Pang, we and most of the netizens have the same question. That is, how is the translation quality of the Chinese version of Steve Jobs' biography? A newspaper asked a very formal question. Pang Yu smiled and said, "Today's questions about Steve Jobs' biography should be answered by our deputy editor, Zhang Yujie, and our translation team leader, Poplar Fruit, but you asked the right person to ask this question. Who told me to be one of the few people who just happened to read the sample book? It can't be helped. I have been looking forward to this book for a long time. Don't blame me for being in a favorable position." Pang Yu's witty words caused the audience to laugh. "I'll evaluate it from the perspective of a book friend. I think this book is really good. It's true. At that time, I was fascinated by it. I couldn't help but call Yang Guo and the others to translate faster, even though they were about to scold me to death." The audience burst into laughter again. "I think the translation quality is good. Of course, this doesn't mean that my opinion is the truth. Translation has always been a matter of benevolence and wisdom. Whether it is good or not, and whether the readers like it or not, they still have to buy a copy and read it at home before they can make an evaluation." Pang Yu paused for a moment, then added, "But the current situation is that many readers have not read the book yet, and they have already commented on the book. We don't support this approach. Deputy Editor Zheng, I have a question for you." A reporter raised his hand. After getting permission, he stood up and asked, "We all know that at that time, there were thousands of applicants for the Translation Network's nationwide audition. But, with so many choices, why did you finally choose 4 translators who had no experience in translating long works?" This question was not sharp, but it was within the expectations of Zhang Yujie. Zhang Yujie calmly picked up the microphone and replied, "We have 2 criteria for choosing translators. First, the best. Translators who can pass our 3 rounds of auditions are people who have extraordinary attainments in English and Chinese. Second, the most suitable. Every translator can't grasp all the themes. For our biography of Steve Jobs, to be our translator, he must have a strong interest in electronic products. We don't need him to be a fan of Steve Jobs, but he must be able to understand the thoughts of Steve Jobs in this book. Otherwise, we will never feel at ease letting him be the messenger of information," Zhang Yujie said calmly. She was indeed from a big family. Even in front of so many cameras, she could still be calm and even exude an aura of confidence. "So, we chose Poplar Fruit and 3 other translators. They are both excellent and competent for this task. Now, It seems that our choice is correct. Zhang Yujie said with a smile. We've heard about the crowdsourced translation of Steve Jobs' biography, he said. But why not just one translator? Why did you choose 4 translators? We all know that everyone has their own habits when it comes to translating. Isn't Dongshin Publishing House afraid that there will be 4 different styles in one book? A newspaper asked. Actually, it's not like there's no precedent for choosing 4 translators to translate together. 2 years ago, Dongshin Publishing used the crowdsourced translation method to publish The Adventures of the Little Prince. Later on, the market response was good. So this time, we have experience to rely on. We are not blindly bold to use such an important book as our experimental field. Zhang Yujie said with a smile. Using 4 translators is actually our helplessness. Everyone knows that our book has more than 500,000 words, and it only took us 30 days to translate it. From the beginning, the foreign publishers did not leave us much time. Not to mention, there were all kinds of unexpected things that happened later on. In the end, the translation team was only left with 30 days. Speaking of this, Zhang Yujie remembered some interesting things when she urged Poplar Fruit to hand in the manuscript. Her heart was moved, but she did not show it on her face. In such a tight time, we can't give the book to one person to translate slowly. We can only use the crowdsourced method and gather everyone's strength to finish the translation before the deadline. Zhang Yujie said with a smile. If it weren't for the efforts of Poplar Fruit and the other 3 translators, we wouldn't have been able to catch up with the global release plan. And the readers who have been looking forward to this book for a long time wouldn't have been able to see the only official autobiography designated by Steve Jobs. Chapter 101. As for the problem of the translation style of Steve Jobs' biography being inconsistent, let's let Mr. Yang, Poplar Fruit, answer it for everyone. I think, other than him, no one is more qualified to answer this question. After Zhang Yujie finished speaking, she turned her head slightly and glanced at Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit smiled at her and nodded. Although the two of them did not discuss it before, at this moment, it was as if they were partners who had worked together countless times. They understood each other's meaning at a glance. Perhaps, they were telepathic. Thank you. Poplar Fruit turned the head of the microphone to himself. Looking at so many people and cameras, he was a little nervous at first, and his voice trembled slightly. In order to hide his nervousness, he even patted the microphone, making a banging sound. The whole audience was looking at him. It was quiet, and the atmosphere was a little oppressive. After taking a deep breath, Poplar Fruit's beating heart calmed down. At first, he still followed the rules and read the script that he had already prepared. I can understand everyone's concerns. When I received the notification that I passed the assessment, I also hesitated for a long time because of this problem. Many of my reporter friends here may know that my main job is to take on translation tasks at Cinder Company. None of the tasks that I have done have been completed with others. This is the first time that I have translated with others, not to mention working with so many people. It was like chatting. Slowly, Yangguo's speech became smoother and smoother. But if you flip through the translated works of foreign literature, it's not hard to find that many of the translated works have 2 or more translators, and there are many excellent works between them. Later, after a month of translating, I realized that it wasn't impossible to work with others to achieve a unified style. In my opinion, literary translation can be divided into 2 styles. One is the style of words and sentences, and the other is the overall style of the translation. When talking about his field of expertise, Poplar Fruit's eyes began to flash with confidence, and the rhythm of his speech became clearer. Choosing words and making sentences. This style, or rather habit, is formed over a long period of time. It's very easy to be subtly influenced by one's past learning, life, work, and other experiences. Yangguo counted with her fingers. For example, the style of urban people who often use the internet and the older generation of scholars who only contact print media are obviously different. Another example is the style of people who dominate the financial industry and people who have been immersed in the IT industry for many years. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. As the saying goes, it is easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. I am most worried that it is difficult to reach a consensus. However, what surprised me was that in the translation team, the style of the four of us is actually not that different. Poplar Fruit turned to look at the others on the stage and said with a smile, I think I should thank Chief Editor Pang and Deputy Editor Zheng of Dongshin Publishing, and President Chen of Yin Yang Network. When the two of them cooperated to select translators, not only were the translators selected very excellent, but their styles were also very similar. In fact, this is not difficult to understand. The four of us are university graduates, and we have a good understanding of the technology industry and new things. For example, we are very interested in Apple and Steve Jobs himself. Of course, being interested in Steve Jobs does not mean that we are all hardcore fans of Steve Jobs. Let me tell you a secret here. One of the translators in our team is a Steve Jobs hater. He knows Steve Jobs' life like the back of his hand, but he often studies it with a critical eye. Poplar Fruit paused for a moment. Soft laughter came from the audience. He then said, however, this does not prevent us from having a pleasant conversation when translating this book. Moreover, we are all very young, and our knowledge comes not only from the books we have studied, but also from the internet. Most importantly, we are all very interested in English. I am ashamed to say that I am the only one who graduated from a professional class, but also the only one who has not obtained any translation certificate. Poplar Fruit pretended to wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Of course, everyone is an individual, and there will still be differences in the style of words and sentences. However, during the review process, I will correct the inconsistencies in everyone's translation and strive to maintain the overall style, Poplar Fruit said confidently. He raised 2 fingers and said, the second style is the overall style of the translation. What is the style of writing? For example, some authors have a literary style, either using poetry or a sad tone. Some authors have a refreshing style, which is very comfortable to read. Some writing styles are profound and obscure, and some are simple and easy to understand. Different styles of writing will give different feelings to the readers. You may have some misunderstandings in this regard. You may think that a translator's translation should be in this style or that style. Actually, this is wrong, Poplar Fruit said seriously. A qualified translator's style of writing will never be the same. For different source languages, especially literary works, translators will change their style of writing according to the style of the author. If it never changes, then the translator is not translating, but rewriting the original work. Yang Guo's eloquence and assurance didn't make the reporters feel bored. In his field of expertise, he showed the demeanor of a master. The cadence of his voice and the simple explanation made everyone intoxicated. It was as if they were listening to Professor Yi Zhongtian's analysis of the 3 kingdoms. Even Professor Rowling, who was sitting next to him, nodded from time to time and showed an expression of agreement. Translating literary works and scientific documents are different concept. The latter could be translated as long as one had a good command of English. This was because technical documents focused on conveying the meaning on the surface. There was no need to think about the style and wording of the translation. You could even use word-for-word translation. As long as the translation could be understood and accurately conveyed the information of the document, it was enough. However, literary works are different. We have a very famous translator called Nidar. He proposed the functional equivalence translation theory. Translation is the most appropriate, natural, and equivalent language to reproduce the source language from semantics to style. This means that the translator has to consider whether the reader can get the same feeling as the original reader. So in addition to the meaning level, the translator also has to consider whether the style of writing matches the original author. After another long discussion, one of the reporters couldn't help but interrupt and ask, "Then how are you going to unify your writing style? Can you unify it just by saying it?" His voice was very abrupt and attracted everyone's attention. However, he raised his head and looked provocative. Finally, there was a different voice in the press conference. Poplar Fruit paused for a moment, but he still calmly said, "Thank you for the question. I would like to ask readers to rest assured that before we started the translation, we had many meetings and chose a language style that we all thought was most suitable for the translation. After talking for so long, You still didn't say anything. I think you guys can't even come up with a style. You're just a gigolo who relies on women, and you want to fool us?" said the reporter as he stood up and pointed at Poplar Fruit. As soon as his voice fell, the audience below the stage buzzed and became chaotic. The reporters in the audience were not stupid. It was obvious that someone invited him to cause trouble. Some of them were discussing the gossip behind the incident, and some were analyzing whether what he said made sense. "Everyone, quiet down." Pang Yu slammed the table and spoke into the microphone. She was indeed a senior editor-in-chief in the industry. With one sentence from her, everyone stopped the commotion and turned to look at her. "The first time you didn't raise your hand and asked questions without permission, I can forgive your ignorance. The second time, you went from bad to worse and spread rumors. You disregarded the order of the press conference. Where do you put your peers? Sorry, we don't welcome reporters like you. Security, please expel him from the venue." As soon as Pang Yu finished speaking, 2 burly security guards surrounded him and forcefully dragged him away. After the door of the venue was closed, Pang Yu's expression eased a little. She said, "Let's continue." Poplar Fruit was full of admiration. Pang Yu's aura was too strong. The entire venue was stunned by her, and no one dared to say a word. After receiving Pang Yu's signal, Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Okay, let me explain to everyone why we chose this style of writing. The main reason is because the author, Mr. Isaacson, has a very plain style of writing. If you read his other biography, Franklin, you will know that Mr. Isaacson focused on readability. His language was simple and clear, and his reasoning was particularly clear. So we decided to continue the style of the original. If we chose a different style, like a romance novel, where the emotions are very strong, then the effect of the book would be distorted. You would even say that Steve Jobs is not like this. He is not an emotional person. So we will try our best to restore the authenticity of the original, and not adapt it with the unique literary style of Chinese." As Poplar Fruit spoke, the admiration in Professor Rowling's eyes became even stronger. The problem of different styles was solved very well from the very beginning. What impressed me even more was that as the translation deepened, everyone's cooperation became more and more tacit. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "This chapter is purely boasting. Don't think that it was copied and pasted from somewhere, and don't think that it is a real translation theory. Insiders, please laugh it off." Chapter 102. We are supporting each other and learning from each other. Under such a positive team atmosphere, everyone is progressing very quickly. There are fewer things that I need to correct. This feeling of working together to do something is really great. It can be said that without everyone working together, it is impossible for us to translate more than 500,000 words of biographical literature in a month. It is cooperation that makes miracles happen, Poplar Fruit said grandly. Poplar Fruit's sincere statement made some of the reporters below the stage couldn't help but applaud. The next few questions were very formulaic, and the few people on the stage also answered very casually. Poplar Fruit also met a few questions that he easily answered. However, it was obvious that not all of the reporters were here to support Dongshin Publishing. Some of them were dissatisfied with this kind of harmonious scene, so they wanted to dig out some exciting news. For example, the one who just stood up and asked seriously, "Mr. Poplar Fruit, you are indeed very handsome. However, you are the youngest, but you are the leader of the 4-person translation team. Is there any inside story? According to the news on the internet, you have a very special relationship with this young and beautiful deputy editor, Ms. Zhang Yujie. Is this the reason?" This reporter and the one who was kicked out just now were very likely to be in cahoots, but this one was very cunning. Every time he said something groundless, it was as if he was just helping the netizens to ask questions. Some of the more unpleasant words, such as unspoken rules, were replaced by vague words such as inside story. Moreover, with his serious look, it was hard to classify him as a troublemaker. Even though he knew what was going on, Pang Yu couldn't find a suitable excuse, so he couldn't do anything. At this time, it was up to Zhang Yujie and Poplar Fruit's ability to adapt. Zhang Yujie grabbed Poplar Fruit, who was about to respond, under the table. She turned the microphone in front of her and said with a faint smile, "I can answer this question. The inside story you mentioned doesn't exist at all. Rumors are just rumors." Our translator selection session was held together with Yin-Yang Web, and every session was supervised by a notary. President Chen of Yin-Yang Web can testify for us. That's right. Chen Fuzong, the president of Yin-Yang Web, nodded slightly and spoke into the microphone. "Thank you," Zhang Yujie said. "After many rounds of selection, we chose poplar fruit, guanyandian, and 3 others. Among them, poplar fruit is the best." Even the professors who were invited by Dongshin Publishing House to be the judges felt that Yang Guo's translation skills were far better than ordinary literary translators. She was not on the same level as the other 3. Therefore, after some discussion, we decided to invite Poplar Fruit to be the team leader of the 4-person translation team. Before this, I've never met Yang Guo. One of us is in the capital, and the other is in Yangcheng. We're thousands of miles apart. How could there be such a ridiculous rumor? That's too ridiculous. Zhang Yujie was a little agitated at the end, but she quickly calmed down and continued, "It turns out that Poplar Fruit is very qualified to be the team leader. Not only is the quantity and quality of his translations far better than the other team members, but he can also take a lot of time to answer questions for the other team members and guide them to do better." What surprised us even more was that after his initial review, the translation was almost perfect. We organized a review team of more than 10 people, but they weren't as efficient as him. My colleagues in the review team were worried that if Poplar Fruit was hired by us, they would lose their jobs. The audience burst into laughter, and a few reporters even applauded. However, the reporter who caused trouble didn't give up. He continued to point his blade at Poplar Fruit. "Mr. Poplar Fruit, since you are so outstanding, why didn't you choose to go to graduate school? Your major is English. Logically speaking, you should have no problem going to graduate school. However, among the 4 translation team members, you are the one with the lowest education level." This question was very sharp. Poplar Fruit held his breath and didn't know how to answer. This was because when he was in school, he wasn't as smart as he was now. At that time, it was impossible for him to go to graduate school. Therefore, he didn't take the risk of giving up his job to go to graduate school. Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment and replied, "At that time, I didn't have the intention to go to graduate school. I found a job and went to do it." "Do you mean that as long as you want to, getting into graduate school is not difficult?" the reporter asked with a twinkle in his eyes. He had been holding Poplar Fruit's transcript for a long time. This was obtained from the system through a person in the Academic Affairs Office of Higoshiyama University. As long as Poplar Fruit gave a positive answer, he could use the headline "Second-rate translator boasting shamelessly, dares to say graduate school is a piece of cake to stir up trouble." Pang Yu understood this kind of language trap as soon as she heard it. Who was she? What kind of insidious questions had she not seen before? She took the microphone and said, "Okay, reporter, you have already asked 2 or 3 questions. You can take a break and leave this opportunity for others to ask questions, okay?" Although it was a negotiation, she said it so firmly that there was no room for negotiation. The reporter sat down unwillingly, but Poplar Fruit did not intend to fool around with this question. He first nodded to Pang Yu to express his gratitude, then turned to look at the reporter and said seriously, "The graduate school entrance examination is not a simple thing. I have never thought of it this way. However, I have always been confident in myself. I think that as long as I prepare with all my strength, whether it is me or the other candidates, we can all get the results we want." Even if he did not know what the reporter was up to, how could Poplar Fruit, who also wrote for a living, not be able to hear the trap in this question? Naturally, he would not act arrogant. His words were also very clever. He turned his confidence into encouragement for all the candidates and did not give the other party an excuse to create hype. However, this question did make Poplar Fruit think. Whether it was before working in a foreign trade company or now as a translator, he felt the importance of education. Taking the postgraduate entrance exam and studying for a postgraduate degree was no pressure for Yang Guo at all. Since this was the case, why not spend some free time to take down this qualification that may be questioned by others? Poplar Fruit remembered that the application for the graduate school entrance examination did not close until the end of October. There were still a few days left. Could it be that he could take the last bus for this year's graduate school entrance examination? Poplar Fruit was multitasking and thought happily. Only Poplar Fruit dared and had the ability to multitask in this kind of situation. He did not know if Dongshin Publishing did something, but other than the two uncooperative reporters, the other reporters intentionally avoided Zheng Yujie. Poplar Fruit, who was very handsome and knowledgeable, gradually became the focus of the reporters. New questions came one after another. Mr. Poplar Fruit, there are rumors on the internet that your previous results were not very good, but as the largest company in Guangdong's translation industry, Xindar Corporation, evaluated you as their best translator. We are all very curious. How did you get to your current level? Can you share with us? A reporter asked. In fact, the rumors on the internet were that Poplar Fruit's previous results were very bad, but there was no evidence. But for the reporters, whether it was good or bad was just a matter of mouth. This reporter, who had been bribed by Dongshin Publishing House, only changed a few words, and the effect of his words was much gentler. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "My previous results were not very good. It was mainly because when I was in school, I was more playful and fell behind a lot of homework." His words were also half true. After all, he could not say that he did not know what he ate after graduation and suddenly became a genius. The main change was this year. I have my own child, a lovely little fairy, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. When talking about Kiki, his face was full of happiness. As a father, I can't fool with life anymore. There was a bit of an uproar when the audience heard that he had a child at such a young age. But at this time, everyone saw his happy face and felt a little touched. I started to think about earning more money, because in this way, I can give her better quality milk powder, buy her softer and more comfortable clothes, and let her live in a better environment. But in order to have more time to accompany her, I quit my foreign trade job that requires me to travel everywhere. I can only go back to my professional work, translation. Translation is not a very good job to earn money. Take Xindar Company as an example. They receive the least commission, but if you want to earn more, you have to be more outstanding, Poplar Fruit said with a little nostalgia. So for my little fairy, I began to read the vocabulary books and translation theory books that used to make me sleepy. No matter how difficult it is, I have to force myself to work hard to be better. Fortunately, my memory is very good. Coupled with the fact that I am really devoted to learning, the speed of my progress is much faster than I thought. After a period of learning, I found that English is no longer a problem for me. I can easily read books in English, just like reading books in Chinese. There are no obstacles. So while trying to do some translation tasks, I continue to learn other people's translation cases and translation theories to enrich myself. President Yarrow of Xindar Company may think a little too highly of me, but I have indeed changed a lot compared to before. I will continue to work hard and strive to live up to President Yarrow's expectations of me. Poplar Fruit laughed. But this also shows that as long as everyone is willing to devote themselves to something, then you will definitely do very well, even beyond your own imagination. Never underestimate yourself. You are far better than you think. This chapter is still purely boasting. Don't think that it is copied and pasted from somewhere, and don't think that it is a real translation theory. Insiders, please laugh it off. Chapter 103. The first question and answer session of the press conference ended in a happy atmosphere. Yang Guo noticed that most of the reporters present were from official media, such as China Youth Daily, Beijing Daily, and so on. The questions they asked weren't as gossipy as the entertainment reporters. Naturally, they wouldn't ask tricky questions that put everyone on the spot. It seemed that the person who arranged this press conference was very skilled. Poplar Fruit sighed in his heart. He did not know if it was Zheng Yujie or someone else who was in charge. It was unlikely that it was Pang Yu. After all, he had a high status. The host did not let the atmosphere cool down. He joked around a bit and announced the start of the second segment. The second segment was a direct conversation with Professor Roland. The reason why Dongshan Publishing chose Professor Rowland was because he was indeed an authoritative figure in the translation field. He had translated countless classics in his life, such as Milton's Paradise Lost, Paradise Restored, and Samson the Mighty, etc. He was also the vice president of the Beijing Translation Association. On the other hand, he was a translator who had received a lot of attention in the past 2 years. He had done a few episodes of talking about translation in a simple way on CCTV's popular lecture room program. He had done a thorough analysis of translation and was still talked about by people today. When Professor Rowland stood up, the entire venue burst into thunderous applause. It was completely different from the treatment that Poplar Fruit received. Professor Rowland stood up and nodded with a smile in response to everyone's enthusiasm. After the applause subsided, he picked up the microphone and said to all the reporters, "Thank you, everyone. I am very honored to be able to attend this press conference today." The reporters in the audience looked at him eagerly. They all knew that Professor Rowland's habit of speaking was to first restrain himself and then restrain himself, or to put it another way, he liked to take a deep breath to whet everyone's appetite. He really did not feel comfortable talking about the cause and effect of a matter. Because, here, I am very likely to be able to personally witness, or rather let everyone witness, the rise of a rising star in the translation field. Professor Rowland said with a smile. He looked at everyone's confused eyes and continued, "You don't believe me? Let me tell you a secret. Although I did not participate in the translation of Steve Jobs' biography, a week ago, I was asked by Dongshan Publishing to help them with the final review of the book. After reading this book, I have to give a thumbs up to the translation of this book." Professor Rowland reached out his left hand and gave a thumbs up. There were a few soft chuckles in the audience. Some people will say, "Old man Rowland, did you receive money to brag like this?" Professor Luo Lin said, "I can tell you that Professor Luo Lin has never received a single cent from anyone. In fact, this book is really well translated. It's the best translation I've seen in the market in the past 3 years. At one point, I even thought that some old guy in the translation industry couldn't stand the loneliness and came out to take on this job. But later, I realized that wasn't the case. So here, I have a question for Mr. Poplar Fruit." Professor Rowland looked at Poplar Fruit with a smile. Poplar Fruit did not dare to be arrogant and quickly stood up respectfully. "I am looking through the translated works of the 4 of you. If I don't look carefully, it is indeed difficult to find a difference in the style of the entire book. I am very curious, how did you do it?" Professor Rowland once talked about it on the show. When he said look carefully, it was to the point of nitpicking. For a normal article, a teacher who studied linguistics to the point of perfection would be able to tell at a glance whether or not there was plagiarism. This was because there were too many flaws between the lines. Poplar Fruit said respectfully, "Thank you for the compliment, Professor Rowland. The main reason why the style is uniform is because I review the translations of the team members every day. If there is anything that is not good enough or does not conform to the style that everyone has agreed on, I will help them correct it. Of course, after this, I will also have a meeting with them to summarize the problems found in the day. We will make fewer mistakes every day. Slowly, everyone will have a better understanding of each other." "You have a lot of work." Professor Rowland sighed. "Just now, Deputy Editor Zheng said that you translated the most out of everyone. As far as I know, the others combined might not even be as much as you. How did you manage to take care of so many things? You have to know that reviewing a book requires a lot of time and effort." Poplar Fruit obviously would not be so stupid as to tell everyone that he could only sleep 3 hours a day. He pondered for a moment, then smiled and said, "It is okay. My translation speed is quite fast. Also, my memory is not bad. The entire book is imprinted in my mind and I remember the meaning. When I review a book, I only need to compare the information in my mind with the words. My speed is very fast." Professor Rowland obviously did not come just to chat with Poplar Fruit. After chatting with Poplar Fruit for a while, he began to ask some professional questions to Poplar Fruit. Other than the translation theory, he also asked a lot of questions about Poplar Fruit's linguistic knowledge. Poplar Fruit answered very seriously. Many of the questions were very profound and were not knowledge that a graduate student could learn. If it were not for the fact that Poplar Fruit had read a lot of books and memorized a lot of obscure theories, he would have been tested by Professor Rowland. Even so, Poplar Fruit still broke out in cold sweat. The more Professor Rowland asked, the more excited he became. Poplar Fruit's fluency in answering questions aroused his curiosity. He really wanted to know the limits of this ridiculously young student in front of him. He had already forgotten all the requests that Pang Yu made when he invited him here. Poplar Fruit made him very satisfied. From the beginning of the conversation to the probing questions, the difficulty became higher and higher. Later on, the questions he asked were questions that even his own doctoral students might not be able to answer. However, Poplar Fruit was able to calmly answer them. If he did not think of the questions on the spot, Professor Rowland would have suspected that this was all an act. At first, the reporters below the stage could still listen to the exchange between the two of them with great interest, but later on, they were all dumbfounded. Those theories could be understood if they were separated into individual words, but when they were put together, they were completely incomprehensible. However, even if they were confused, they were still convinced by Poplar Fruit. To be able to speak so confidently under Professor Rowland's difficult test, this showed that Poplar Fruit was not as useless as the internet said. A person who is educated will naturally be talented. This sentence was most suitable for Poplar Fruit. When he answered Professor Rowland's questions, the confident expression on his face gave people the illusion that Poplar Fruit was even better than Professor Rowland. Of course, they quickly overturned this ridiculous idea of theirs. Yes, how could Poplar Fruit, who was not famous at all, be better than Professor Rowland? However, they were certain of one thing, and that was that Poplar Fruit was indeed an excellent translator. Chapter 104. Professor Luo Lin did not continue to make things difficult for young Guo. He stopped his slightly out-of-control examination and said with a smile, "Let's get back to the topic. After reading your translation, I have a question. It's about a small paragraph in the book." He turned to look at Pang Yu and said with a smile, "Chief Editor Pang, the book hasn't been officially published yet. I wonder if it's all right if I bring that short paragraph here to talk about it." Pang Yu elegantly waved his hand and smiled. "Originally, it's not allowed to reveal the contents of the book, but since the Xiao Duan is fine, I'll approve it." Professor Luo Lin smiled slyly and looked at Poplar Fruit. "Poplar Fruit, you said before that you have an excellent memory. Do you still remember the farewell letter that Steve Jobs wrote to his wife?" How could Poplar Fruit not remember? The whole book was in his head. He asked. Teacher Luo should be referring to chapter 39, the middle section on page 487, right? Oh, that's right. Professor Luo Lin thought for a moment. He could only vaguely remember that it was the chapter that Poplar Fruit was talking about. As for whether it was page 487, he could not remember at all. However, this was not a big problem. He smiled and said, "Then can I trouble you to recite the original text and your translation?" Once this was said, the audience began to discuss. They all shook their heads and felt that it was impossible. Unless it was agreed upon beforehand, how could anyone remember a few hundred words out of 500,000 words? Professor Luo Lin took out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to a reporter from Beijing Daily. He said, "Originally, I should be the one reading it out loud, but I came up with this little test on the spur of the moment. Now, I want this reporter to print out the original English text and Poplar Fruit's translation as witnesses. This is going to be interesting." The audience quieted down. All eyes were focused on Poplar Fruit, waiting to see how he would respond. However, Poplar Fruit was confident. He was not afraid at all. After all, his super memory was not for show. Poplar Fruit smiled. With his left hand behind his back and his right hand holding the microphone, he said with a nostalgic expression, "We? Underscore. Didn't know underscore much underscore about underscore each underscore other underscore 20 years underscore ago." Poplar Fruit's English was an American accent. It did not have the so-called Chinese accent that gave people a noble feeling. However, Yang Guo's pronunciation was very pleasant to the ears. It was like a gentle breeze brushing against a willow tree, gentle and clear. Many of the reporters in the audience were fans of American dramas. This was the first time they heard Poplar Fruit speak English. They did not feel that it was out of place. It was just like watching an American drama. Although they could not understand without subtitles, they could still feel that Poplar Fruit's English pronunciation was not worse than an authentic American. After reading the farewell letter in English, Poplar Fruit smiled and started reading his translation. 20 years ago, we did not know much about each other. Intuition led us to meet each other. You made me fall head over heels for you. On the day of Yvonne's wedding, it was snowing. Many years later, the children came to report. We went through good times and bad, but there was never a day when we did not cherish each other. Our love and respect for each other grew and intensified with each passing day. We went through too many things together. Now, we are back to the same place 20 years ago. As we grew older, our wisdom grew. Our faces and hearts were marked by time. We went through the joys, pains, secrets, and all kinds of wonderful things in life, but we are still together. I fell head over heels for you, and I still have not come back to my senses. The audience was silent. Poplar Fruit slowly put down the microphone. Only then did he hear the thunderous applause from the audience. This was the first time. The reporters gave him a round of applause. Of course, they were not impressed by Poplar Fruit's extraordinary memory. Perhaps they were impressed by the beautifully translated farewell letter. They were impressed by Steve Jobs' sincere love for his wife. At this time, the reporter who was holding the note exclaimed, "Poplar Fruit memorized it without missing a word." Unfortunately, no one paid attention to this matter. Whether Poplar Fruit was acting or could really memorize it, it was not important. The important thing was that through the translation of Poplar Fruit's farewell letter, everyone realized that the quality of Poplar Fruit's translation was really good. Professor Luo Lin asked the staff to type the farewell letter in both Chinese and English on the big screen. He laughed and commented on it, but he was not satisfied. Immediately after, he threw out a new question, a new bombshell. The translation of this farewell letter is indeed very simple. The words used are very common, but it also deeply shows Steve Jobs' love for his wife. Poplar Fruit, your translation skills are really good, Professor Luo Lin said. Poplar Fruit was about to stand up to show modesty, but he waved his hand and tilted his head like an old urchin and said, "I still want to test you on the spot. Let's see if you can translate this in a more emotional way. Pay attention. I want a prose style. Isn't this too difficult? Impromptu translation on the spot. Or does he want prose?" Poplar Fruit was stunned. This professor is not honest. Giving such a difficult question. Even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs translator might not be able to answer it, right? Poplar Fruit obviously would not give up so easily. The harder the question, the more Poplar Fruit's competitive spirit was aroused. He rested his chin on the microphone and pondered for less than 2 minutes. Then he looked up and calmly said, 20 years ago, we didn't know much about each other. We went where we wanted to go, where we wanted to go. You dazzled me, as if I were in the clouds. When we were married in Yvonne, snowflakes filled the sky. Time flies, the birth of our children, the good times, the hard times, are still fresh in our minds, and we have not experienced the hard times. Our love and respect for each other have been steeped and fermented through the years. We have weathered many storms together, and seen all the vicissitudes of the world. 20 years later, revisiting old places, we are older, wiser, and the marks of time have left wrinkles on our faces and hearts. We finally understand what the happiness, pain, secrets, and miracles of life mean. Because of this, we continue to live together hand in hand. As for me, who is in the clouds, my feet are the same as before, never stepping back into the world. Yang Guo's voice was like a feather falling from the sky, swaying people's hearts. This translation was really too beautiful. It could even be said that it was as beautiful as a painting. Listening to it, it was imprinted in people's hearts. If this was not lyrical prose, then what could be considered lyrical prose? Poplar Fruit's answer stunned the audience. Even the originator, Professor Rowling, was mesmerized by it. He even turned a deaf ear to the thunderous applause below the stage. He was still muttering to himself, savoring Poplar Fruit's impromptu translation. A reporter below the stage could not help but ask, "Mr. Poplar Fruit, I think your translation is even more beautiful than the previous one. Why did you choose that one? Why didn't you translate it better? We all saw it. You could have done it better." "That's right." The audience echoed one after another. Professor Rowling raised the microphone and smiled. "Let me answer this question for Poplar Fruit. Actually, Poplar Fruit has already told everyone the answer to this question. The ultimate goal of translation is to convey the message the author wants to convey to the reader. Sometimes, we don't pursue the best and most beautiful translation because this kind of translation is not the most suitable. It may not be able to convey the original meaning the author wants to convey. Everyone, look at this article. This is Mr. Steve Jobs' farewell letter to his wife. Everyone knows Mr. Steve Jobs. He's a big entrepreneur and a leader in the science and technology industry. However, he has never been called a great writer. Can anyone expect him to write a brilliant article? That's obviously not realistic. Then let's think back. Poplar Fruit's lyrical prose. If I told you that this was written by Steve Jobs, would you believe me? Yes, when we translate this farewell letter, not only do we have to express the love Steve Jobs wants to convey to his wife, but we also have to translate Steve Jobs' style of writing. This way, our readers won't feel that it's too abrupt. So, of the two translations just now, even though the latter one is more touching, if you all calm down and think about it, you'll realize that the one that really resembles the book is the one that Yang will read first, said Professor Luo Lin with a straight face. After listening to his explanation, the reporters in the audience fell into deep thought. They all regained their calmness and carefully read it. Professor Rowling laughed and said, "I've been the one asking all this time. Everyone might think that I've communicated with Poplar Fruit to deceive everyone. How about this? One of you can stand up and point out a literary genre for Poplar Fruit and let him read this farewell letter again. How about that?" Poplar Fruit was dizzy. This professor really can't stop playing. Doesn't he know that impromptu translation is a very taxing task? The audience was already bustling. Many people were eager to give it a try. On one hand, they really wanted to test Poplar Fruit. On the other hand, they also wanted to see if there were any other beautiful translations. In the end, a reporter from the Beijing Evening News came out on top. He stood up and said excitedly, "I want Mr. Yang Guo to translate this farewell letter into a song poem." Song poem? Song poem. Are you sure your head didn't get squeezed by a door? Song poem. Poetry is one of the most difficult literary genres to translate in China. Although it's not translating poetry, translating a paragraph from English into Chinese and filling it in as a poem, isn't this just tormenting people? But since Professor Rowling had already spoken, Poplar Fruit could only brace himself and do it. This time, he thought for a long time, spending a full 5 minutes. Just as the host was worried that Poplar Fruit wouldn't be able to read it and was about to smooth things over, Poplar Fruit suddenly raised his head. Poplar Fruit raised the microphone and smiled as he read, 20 years ago, before we knew each other. Our love for each other lingered in our dreams. Hand in hand, white snow as a witness. Many years passed in the snap of a finger, before our knees. Sorrow and joy depend on each other, inseparable and unchanging. Love like a boulder, mutual respect and humility. 20 years of experience, I'm old and wise. Love is like the first time we met, but my hair is white and my face is covered with dust. Through trials and tribulations, I share joy with you, smiling with thousands of true meanings. In heaven and earth, my infatuation is always with you. Everyone in the room, including Professor Luo Lin, was stunned when they heard this. In ancient times, there was Cao Ji who wrote a poem in 7 steps. Today, there was Poplar Fruit who wrote a poem in 5 minutes. And it was translated. If it was said that everyone was just lamenting Poplar Fruit's quick thinking before, then now, everyone wanted to cut open Poplar Fruit to take a look. This was too monstrous. Chapter 105. After the press conference, the impatient Poplar Fruit did not wait for the reporters to leave. He excused himself from Pang Yu and the others and hurriedly left from the backstage. About 10 minutes ago, a staff member came over and handed him a note. saying that Kiki had woken up and was crying non-stop. At that moment, Poplar Fruit's heart flew away. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit segment was over. After that, it was Pang Yu and Chen Fuzong from Yin Yang Network to conclude. Otherwise, Poplar Fruit's answer would have been full of mistakes. Pang Yu and Chen Fuzong were still exchanging pleasantries. Zhang Yujie stood to the side absent-mindedly. Her eyes followed Poplar Fruit's back view as he left. She was a little reluctant to part with him. Poplar Fruit's performance earlier not only convinced the reporters, but even Zhang Yujie, who was sitting next to her, was mesmerized. As the saying goes, a scholar's temperament is a talent. The confident Poplar Fruit, who spoke with assurance, was outstanding even if he did not have a handsome appearance. As Pang Yu chatted, she caught a glimpse of Zhang Yujie's expression. She followed Zhang Yujie's gaze and happened to see Poplar Fruit's sleeve corner as he closed the door and left. She was experienced, so how could she not understand the subtlety of it? However, Pang Yu did not change her expression. She turned back and pretended that nothing had happened as she continued chatting with Chen Fuzong. She even smiled brightly from time to time. However, she sighed in her heart. Pang Yu and Zhang Yujie's mother were university classmates. It could be said that she had watched Zhang Yujie grow up. She knew Zhang Yujie's character very well. She was strong-minded and even a little rebellious. As long as she decided on something, even 10 mules would not be able to pull her back. If only Poplar Fruit didn't have a daughter, Pang Yu felt that it was a pity. She also thought highly of Poplar Fruit. At such a young age, he had already made great achievements in academics and translation. Moreover, he was tall and handsome. Not to mention Zhang Yujie, if she were 30 years younger, she would not be able to control herself. But so what? First of all, Poplar Fruit's background was mediocre. Even if he was handsome, he wouldn't be able to marry into a big family. What's more, Yanghua already had a child. Not to mention the big families that wanted to save face, even if it was an ordinary family, they wouldn't be willing to marry their pure and innocent eldest daughter to him. So what if Zhang Yujie likes him? If this relationship continued, it would only be an ill-fated relationship. On the other hand, Poplar Fruit strode back to the side hall and opened the door. He thought that he would hear Kiki's earth-shattering cries, but he didn't. Poplar Fruit looked around and saw the assistant girl sitting in front of a wall-mounted TV with Kiki in her arms. Kiki was also watching with great interest. Poplar Fruit was stunned. Didn't they say that she was crying badly? Why wasn't there any movement at all? The sound of the door opening startled the assistant girl. She turned her head and saw Poplar Fruit. She quickly stood up. Kiki was still staring at the TV. Poplar Fruit looked at the TV carefully. It turned out that it was a video of his press conference. It could be seen in the side hall, and the assistant girl must have pressed the replay. Kiki. Poplar Fruit called softly. Kiki was stunned. She only reacted when Poplar Fruit called her a second time. She turned around and looked at Poplar Fruit in disbelief. Then she turned back to look at the TV. She finally confirmed that the person calling her now was her real father. Giggling, Kiki leaned her body towards her father and stretched out her arms. Poplar Fruit knew that Kiki wanted her father to hug her. Poplar Fruit's face also revealed a bright smile. He bent down slightly and hugged Kiki into his arms. The father and daughter's smiles complemented each other. It was as if the lights in the side hall dimmed a lot. The assistant girl smiled and said, "Just now, the baby was crying non-stop. Coincidentally, your speech was playing on the TV. When she heard your voice, she quieted down." Poplar Fruit kissed his daughter and smiled at the assistant girl. Yes, when she woke up and didn't see me, she would make a fuss. But this is also the first time I know that she can still see me on the TV as her father by her side. Maybe the quality of our TV is too good. It has a 1080p super high-definition screen and restores your voice and image. The assistant girl said mischievously as if she was selling advertisements. Poplar Fruit couldn't stop laughing. There was a banquet in the evening. Poplar Fruit carried his daughter and pushed the baby stroller back to prepare. He really didn't rest for a minute the whole day. Back at the hotel, he first gave Kiki a bath and put on the fragrant talcum powder. Then he fed her dinner. Poplar Fruit didn't go through so much trouble. He didn't even change his clothes. He just washed his face and carried his daughter out. The clothes Kiki wore today were bought by Zhang Yujie. It was a white pleated dress, and it was very beautiful. It was a sharp contrast with her father's black suit. They were like a princess and a prince. When they were about to walk out of the hotel, Chichi's small hands wrapped around Yangguo's neck. Her small mouth exhaled a fragrant breath as she moved closer to his ear and muttered the words she had just learned, "Daddy." Poplar Fruit only felt his heart was filled with happiness. He kept walking, but the smile on his face betrayed his mood. Zhang Yujie didn't come to pick him up because she was too busy. So, Poplar Fruit took a taxi to Quanjude. As a foodie who loved delicious food, Poplar Fruit had been admiring Beijing roast duck for a long time. It was just that he had never tried the authentic Quanjude roast duck. Quanjude could be said to be the origin of Quanjude. It had a history of more than 140 years. It could be said to be the most authentic of the authentic Quanjude. Looks like I am going to have a good meal today. Poplar Fruit thought happily. Although it had been through the baptism of wind and rain for more than 100 years, Quanjude still retained its traditional style. It had green brick floors, a wooden attic, a black lacquered counter, and a square table. The shop assistants in green shirts and hats were enthusiastically cheering in the endless stream of people. The continuous and energetic Beijing dialect made people feel that this was the real essence of Beijing. Under the guidance of a shop assistant, Poplar Fruit arrived at the Swallow Cloud Pavilion on the 3rd floor. It was a big banquet hall. In the middle of the hall was a huge round table with a dozen seats. The table was decorated with solid wood armchairs, square tables, and blue and white porcelain vases. It was simple but majestic. When Poplar Fruit and Kiki appeared, other than Pang Yu and Chen Fuzong, Zhang Yujie and a few other people in charge were already present. They were sitting on the solid wood armchairs, drinking tea and chatting. When they saw Poplar Fruit, they happily greeted him. Today, Poplar Fruit had left a deep impression on them. Although the final result wasn't out yet, based on their experience, there was an 80% to 90% chance that they would win this battle. And this hero naturally had to be Poplar Fruit. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't the focus of everyone's attention. Little Kiki, who was dressed like a princess, attracted everyone's attention. She could be said to be attractive to both men and women. She was beautiful and cute. Everyone gathered around and affectionately played with Kiki, wanting to hug her. However, Kiki only responded with a smile. If any of the aunties reached out to hug her, she wouldn't be happy. Everyone could only give up. However, their love for Kiki didn't decrease. Yang Guo was tall and strong. Even in the north, where most people were tall, he stood out like a crane among chickens. He was a head taller than everyone else, so he immediately saw Zhang Yujie, who was standing at the back and not joining in the fun. He smiled and gave her a thumbs up. He mouthed to Zhang Yujie, "Thank you." Zhang Yujie looked at him with shining eyes. The corner of her mouth revealed a trace of a sweet smile. Pang Yu was the last to arrive. However, she was still with Chen Fuzong and Dongshin Publishing's big boss, the president. The president was a busy person. He usually didn't attend banquets between employees. Because Pang Yu said that today's press conference was very successful, he came over to toast everyone. Chen Fuzong left with the president. Pang Yu stayed behind. She always got along well with the editors under her, so even though she was there, the atmosphere suddenly became lively after the president and the others left. While waiting for the dishes to be served, Pang Yu chatted with everyone about recent interesting things. She even went to Poplar Fruit's side to look at little Kiki. Previously, when she met Poplar Fruit, she only caught a glimpse. This time, she saw clearly. The baby is so beautiful. Pang Yu couldn't help but praise in her heart. This child must have inherited all of Poplar Fruit's good points. Pang Yu thought in her heart. She was still in swaddling clothes, but she could already see that she was a beauty. What would happen when she grew up? Could it be Xiao Yu's child? Pang Yu just had this thought in her heart, but she immediately rejected it. Although Zhang Yujie frequently went abroad for business trips a few years ago, and she would be gone for several months at a time, she always paid attention. It was impossible for her to not have any clues when it came to giving birth to a child. However, Zheng Yujie actually fell in love with a man who already had a child. This was something that Pang Yu never expected. Didn't she always have her eyes on the top of her head? There were so many young masters in Beijing, but none of them could enter her eyes. Shouldn't it be easier to lose points if they had a child? Pang Yu really couldn't figure it out. When she first saw poplar fruit, she still had some misgivings. However, when she saw the innocent and cute little Kiki, she also threw this thought out of her mind. She could only say that Kiki's charm was simply too amazing. The fragrant Beijing roast duck was quickly served. Poplar fruit was already drooling. There were more women present, so they couldn't drink anymore. Thus, under Pang Yu's instructions, everyone started to eat heartily. Quanjude's roast duck was made by making a small hole in the duck's body. After removing the innards, they poured boiling water in. This way, the duck wouldn't be roasted dry. Furthermore, the roasted duck's skin was thin and crispy. When dipped in white sugar, it had a unique flavor. The most common way to eat Beijing roast duck was to use a thin layer of skin to roll up the duck and green onions, dip them in a sweet sauce, and then chew on them. When poplar fruit saw the others eating this way, he also followed suit. In the end, he was stimulated by the spiciness of the northern green onions, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Even Kiki, who didn't know the truth, also giggled. Even so, poplar fruit wouldn't back down. In front of delicious food, what was this little bit of spiciness? Chapter 106. There were still 2 days before the official release of Steve Jobs' biography. Poplar Fruit planned to bring Kiki around Beijing. Zheng Yujie originally wanted to be Poplar Fruit's tour guide, but she had no choice. She was the person in charge of the project and had a lot of decisions to make. She couldn't leave at the moment. Where should I go? In Beijing, Huhai and Sanliton's bar streets were very popular, but it wasn't convenient for him to bring his daughter along. Liu Lichang and Pan Garden were antique cities, and he didn't know anything about antiques, so there was no point in going. All the attractions were listed on the screen, and he might not be able to finish looking at them in 1 or 2 months. But Poplar Fruit felt that there was a place he couldn't not go. That was the Forbidden City of the Forbidden City. Beijing was the ancient capital of the 6 dynasties, and the Forbidden City was the palace of the 2 most recent feudal dynasties. It was the symbol of imperial power and the representative of ancient Chinese architecture. Thinking back to a few hundred years ago, when there were no large machinery and no advanced construction technology, on a vast land with a width of 750 meters from east to west and a length of 960 meters from north to south, an area of 720,000 square meters, there were more than 9,000 luxurious palaces symmetrically arranged along the central axis. What kind of miracle was this? Until today, it was still the focus of the world. How could he not go to such a place to pay his respects? Poplar Fruit thought that now that the National Day holiday had passed, and it wasn't a weekend, there shouldn't be too many people going to the Forbidden City at this time, right? After arriving, Poplar Fruit realized that he had taken it for granted. Even if it was a working day, there was still an endless stream of tourists coming to the Forbidden City. There were people from other places with different accents, and there were also blonde and blue-eyed foreign tourists. Poplar Fruit wasn't the only one who understood that the Forbidden City was the top tourist attraction in the world. How could tourists not come to Beijing to take a look? Even though there were a lot of people, it was still okay. It wasn't a sea of people. Today, Kiki was sitting in her father's arms. She was traveling with her father. She was wearing a white panda shirt and a matching hat. Her 2 black round ears looked very cute on the white hat. While Poplar Fruit was queuing up to buy tickets, Kiki couldn't help but look around, attracting the attention of many tourists. There were even 2 blonde beauties from America who couldn't help but want to take a photo with Kiki. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to stand between them and make a peace sign with a stiff expression. After waiting in line for almost a quarter of an hour, they finally bought the tickets. Finally, they could enter this palace complex. Poplar Fruit calmed down his excitement and walked in through the gate of immortal martial arts with his arms around Kiki's belly. The gate of immortal martial arts belonged to the back door. After Poplar Fruit entered, the first thing he saw wasn't the huge palace, but the garden-style royal backyard, the Imperial Garden. The Imperial Garden was very different from the Suzhou Gardens in Jiangnan. It lacked a reserved delicateness. There were towering pines and cypresses, rare flowers and trees, and natural stones that looked like they were carefully carved. The pavilions and terraces spanned across the lotus pond and blue lake. Although it was quiet and serene, people who were in this place could feel a kind of indifferent atmosphere. Kiki liked beautiful places like the Imperial Garden, which had flowers and grass. She sat on Poplar Fruit's chest and looked at the beautiful scenery, happily clapping her little hands. When Poplar Fruit was about to leave, she pouted unhappily and kicked her legs. Her temper wasn't small. After passing through the Imperial Garden, there were all kinds of palaces of different sizes. Although it was still the inner court, the palaces here weren't small. There were Palace of Heavenly Purity, Jiaotai Palace, Palace of Earthly Tranquility, and so on. They were all familiar names from period dramas. However, perhaps because it was the living quarters of the royal family, there were all kinds of independent courtyards and gardens everywhere. After passing through the inner court, Poplar Fruit held up an umbrella. The main reason was to shelter Kiki from the sun. He couldn't just come to the capital and let his daughter become a little black pig. The style of the Imperial Palace in front of the Forbidden City was completely different from the inner court that Poplar Fruit had just seen. Its overall style was big and wide, tall and majestic. Time was limited, so Poplar Fruit couldn't leisurely stroll through the palaces one by one. He could only walk through each of the main halls. However, the shock in his heart couldn't stop. From afar, it was magnificent and majestic. From afar, it was magnificent and majestic. When he looked closer, it was classical, rich, and solemn. In the past, the Celestial Empire was so big and powerful. How did it fall to such a state? Although he only hurriedly passed by many of the palaces, Poplar Fruit didn't let go of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. This legendary Hall of the Golden Throne was an existence that was recorded in books even in unofficial history. Not only was it the largest of all the palaces, its specifications were also the highest and most luxurious. Not to mention its 5 ridges and 4 slopes, just the 10 different shaped animal sculptures on the eaves were unique in the world. Poplar Fruit found the most interesting were the golden coiled dragon pillars beside the throne. They looked especially like the sea-stabilizing needle in Journey to the West. He didn't know if Wu Chenzhen had been inspired by these pillars. Many people mistakenly thought that the Hall of Supreme Harmony was the place where the emperor went to court every day. Poplar Fruit had done some research before coming. Actually, that wasn't the case. The Hall of Supreme Harmony was a place with the highest specifications used to hold important ceremonies, such as the emperor's wedding, birthday, and so on. Of course, the worship ceremony wasn't here. It was at the Huanqiu altar next to the Temple of Heaven. When one came to a scenic spot, the most important thing was to take pictures as a souvenir. Poplar Fruit, who was passionate about recording every detail of his and his daughter's life, naturally wouldn't forget. Other than taking a few pictures in the Imperial Garden and in front of the various palaces, Poplar Fruit even took a selfie of himself and Kiki with his iPhone in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Compared to asking tourists to help take pictures, Poplar Fruit was more confident in his photography skills. Especially after a few months of practice, Poplar Fruit had gradually mastered a unique selfie technique. No matter if it was serious or funny, he could easily hold it. Poplar Fruit couldn't get close to the dragon throne. He could only take pictures from afar. Even though there were many people, Poplar Fruit still cleverly used borrowed positions and unique angles. Not only did he not accidentally take a picture, but he also took the effect of the father and daughter sitting on the dragon throne and laughing. This was also thanks to the fact that the aperture of the iPhone wasn't too big, so it wouldn't cause the far-end blur effect due to focusing. After walking out of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, Poplar Fruit was still a little reluctant to leave. That was because the Forbidden City was almost one after another. There were many places in the Forbidden City that weren't open to tourists. Only the main palaces on the left and right of the central axis were open. If there was a chance, Poplar Fruit really wanted to walk around the entire Forbidden City, Walking around the Forbidden City took less than a morning. However, Poplar Fruit didn't plan to stay inside any longer. Because even if he could bear with the hunger, Kiki also wanted to drink milk. After playing for an entire morning, Kiki was also a little tired. After walking out of the Meridian Gate, they walked for a long time before finding a cafe that wasn't that crowded. After entering, Poplar Fruit realized the reason why there weren't so many people in this cafe. It was really too expensive. Ordinary latte coffee cost more than 200 yuan a cup. Ordinary tourists really couldn't afford it. The most expensive coffee Poplar Fruit had ever drunk in Yangcheng was at a foreign trade company. Once when he went out to meet a client, he treated the client to cat poop coffee at public expense. That was 288 yuan a cup, but that was cat poop coffee. That cafe's latte was only about 50 yuan, so what if it was expensive? Poplar Fruit didn't mind. He wasn't short of money now. Although he hadn't received any orders for the past 2 months, the book he read with Dongshin Publishing had earned him more than 100,000 renminbi. Furthermore, there were other miscellaneous rewards like translation team leader, book reviewer, etc. Compared to money, Poplar Fruit was more concerned about Kiki's peaceful and comfortable afternoon nap. These were all provided by this cafe. Poplar Fruit ordered a cup of Blue Mountain coffee, which cost 366 renminbi. He couldn't tell if it was authentic or not. He had read a rumor that the Blue Mountain coffee in Chinese cafes were all fake. But it didn't matter. He liked the Blue Mountain coffee's mellow taste and unique sour taste. Even if he couldn't afford to drink authentic Blue Mountain coffee, and he couldn't afford it, it's not bad to drink something less authentic. He ordered some snacks and a cup of hot water. The hot water was for Kiki to make milk powder. After Kiki finished the milk powder, she listened to the cafe's music for a while before falling asleep. After drinking the coffee, Yang Guo was in high spirits. However, he didn't want to walk around under the hot sun. He simply sat on the soft sofa in the coffee shop with one hand behind his head and the other hand hugging Chichi through the small quilt covering her body. He opened his eyes and didn't feel sleepy at all. He was just thinking about what he wanted to do in the near future. The translation of Steve Jobs' biography project was basically completed. Poplar Fruit should go back to be his own gold medal translator. Although Yarrow Dehua kept saying that it didn't matter, Poplar Fruit still felt that this big brother still needed him. If there wasn't a reliable and capable person, he wouldn't dare to easily entrust those urgent and important tasks to him. Yarrow Dehua had helped him a lot in this storm of public opinion. At least he didn't have to be so passive. In his hometown, there were still media outlets in Guangdong that spoke up for him. This kind of touching was beyond touching. This kind of kindness, he must find a chance to repay it. Secondly, his mother had called him many times, and the plan to go home was delayed again and again. This time, after the matter in Beijing was settled, he must go back to his hometown to accompany his parents. He hadn't been home for more than half a year. There was also the matter of his own postgraduate studies. No one knew his current situation better than Poplar Fruit. His ability had long left the postgraduate students in the dust. The postgraduate entrance examination was not a problem for him. The problem was, where should he apply for postgraduate studies? In a few days, this year's postgraduate entrance examination would be closed. Poplar Fruit didn't want to wait another year. It would be best if he could solve it tonight or tomorrow. Yang Guo didn't know why, but a slender and elegant figure standing by the lake suddenly flashed through his mind, and a smiling face as happy as a flower with Chichi sticking close to each other. Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit scratched his head and ridiculed himself in his heart. But he also made up his mind. Since it was just to get a diploma and become a postgraduate student, why should he care about where he studied? Yes, that's the reason. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Chapter 107. Lying on the soft chair in the coffee shop and looking at the photos he took, Poplar Fruit suddenly laughed silently. This photo was really fun. It was in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. He was holding his left fist from afar. In the photo, it was as if he was holding a coiled dragon pillar. Kiki was grinning as she put one hand on her father's left arm and the other hand was waving in the air. In the photo, it was as if she wanted to take the golden cudgel from her father's hand. That expression, that action, although it was a coincidence, it was really too realistic. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but now Poplar Fruit was overjoyed. He double-clicked to zoom in and then zoomed out. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that it was interesting. There was Wi-Fi in the coffee shop. Poplar Fruit picked a few more interesting photos and posted them on Weibo. At that time, there was no ability to upload multiple photos at the same time. At around 4 in the afternoon, Kiki woke up. Poplar Fruit walked out of the coffee shop and walked around Tiananmen Square while the sky was still bright. Other than taking photos and sighing about China's dominance, there wasn't much else in Tiananmen Square that was interesting. It was almost evening, and he still couldn't see the flag-raising ceremony. After walking for a day, Poplar Fruit still didn't feel tired. He didn't plan to call a taxi because it was only a little more than a stop away from Wangfujing. He walked in that direction and prepared to find an old fried belly restaurant that he saw in the tourist brochure. After coming to Beijing, it was really too wasteful to stay in the hotel and eat the same food from all over the country. There were so many delicious snacks in Beijing. Even if he couldn't try every one of them, he still had to grab the opportunity to try. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. On the way, he suddenly heard a few words in English. Actually, it wasn't strange to hear the English Poplar Fruit in Beijing. That was because there were too many foreign tourists in Beijing. He saw quite a few in the Forbidden City in the morning. However, Poplar Fruit could sense a sense of impatience and helplessness in these few sentences. Turning his head, he saw a thin middle-aged man with a beard and a Middle Eastern face standing in front of an old man wearing a red armband. He anxiously explained, "No, I'm asking about the washroom. Where is the washroom? P.S. Other than a few words, please use Chinese as much as possible for the dialogue below. I'm Lun." The old man was confused. "You're Lun?" Yes, the middle-aged foreigner nodded and then shook his head. No, is it the washroom?" The old man still did not understand. He asked again, "I am Lun." "No, I'm not Lun." Helpless, the middle-aged foreigner changed his words and asked again, "Lavatory, where is the lavatory?" Not only was he desperately trying to explain, but he was also gesturing with his hands and feet to go to the lavatory. However, the old man was still confused. But when he saw the middle-aged foreigner's body language, he asked, "Are you talking about the toilet?" WC. The foreigner had an American accent, and this well-known abbreviation had only been used in Yingjili. Almost no one had seen it in the United States. How could the middle-aged foreigner understand it? He thought the old man was talking about something else. No, the middle-aged foreigner was already very anxious. He squeezed his feet and scratched his ears and cheeks, thinking about how to explain the word toilet to the old man. Poplar Fruit looked at him and found it funny. The language barrier was indeed a big problem. A few years ago, when Beijing held the Olympic Games, almost everyone was learning English. Now, the enthusiasm had faded. The question and answer between the old man who was in charge of street sanitation and the middle-aged foreigner in a special situation were not on the same channel at all. Poplar Fruit stepped forward and said to the middle-aged foreigner in English, "Hello, let me do it. Please wait a moment." He turned his head and said to the old man, "Uncle, this foreign friend is actually asking where the toilet is. Just point it out to him." The old man patted his thigh and laughed. "I told you I guessed right." He gestured that he wanted to go to the toilet and shook his head. "Young man, you're smart. You even know how to speak English." The old man talked for a long time, then pointed to an alley and said, "Follow this way. Go to the end and turn left. You'll see it." Poplar Fruit translated to the middle-aged foreigner. The muscles on his face finally relaxed. Because he was in a hurry to go to the toilet, he just hurriedly thanked Poplar Fruit and then ran in that direction. It seemed that he had been holding it in for a long time. Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit turned back and thanked the warm-hearted old man with the armband. He then walked to the old store. He was now only a road away from the store. He could see the quaint signboard when he looked up. Poplar Fruit realized that no matter if the things they sold were new products, or if the interior decoration or service was very modern, as long as it was an old store, They liked to renovate the exterior of the store to have a contemporary feel. It was easy for customers to find because at a glance, they could tell that this was an old store with a long history. The food inside should be very authentic. It had to be said that this marketing strategy was quite successful. A group of customers lined up on the benches in front of the door was a good indication of the popularity of this place. Poplar Fruit was also in line. Suddenly, he felt a pat on his shoulder. He looked back and saw that it was the middle-aged foreigner. He smiled happily and said, "So you're here. I've been looking for you for a long time." Poplar Fruit also smiled at him. "Thank you so much just now. Your help was very timely." The middle-aged foreigner grinned. His beard trembled with the muscles on his cheeks. "You're welcome." Poplar Fruit looked at him and smiled. "Actually, if you're asking for directions in China, it's best to find young people. They have received more English education." "Oh, I thought they were wearing this." The middle-aged foreigner gestured with his arm and traced the appearance of the armband. He said, "They're volunteers who serve the community. I heard from my friends that they came to China during the Olympic Games. The volunteers in China can speak English." Poplar Fruit smiled awkwardly. At that time, the entire capital was frantically learning English because of the National Olympic Games. Even the uncles and aunties could hum "Good morning." However, that was only a temporary popularity. After a few years, it went back to square one. It was funny when he thought about it. Poplar Fruit did not want to talk about this issue with him, so he changed the topic. "Did you come here to try the fried tripe, a Chinese specialty food? Is it delicious?" The middle-aged foreigner asked with great interest. "I came to find you because I wanted to say thank you again. Also, I wanted to ask you, do you know how to get to the Lai Ku Hotel?" When he asked for a guest, his tone was very flat. It sounded like he was saying Lai Ku Da. Poplar Fruit was a little confused at first. When he was about to say that he had just arrived in the capital and was not very familiar with it, the middle-aged foreigner took out his room key and room card. "Here, Lai Ku Da Hotel." Poplar Fruit suddenly understood. He smiled and took out his room card. He waved it in front of the middle-aged foreigner and said, "I know, I'm staying in the same hotel as you." "That's great. We're really fated," the middle-aged foreigner said excitedly. "Can you tell me how to get back?" Poplar Fruit recalled the map he memorized before coming out to play. He realized that it was too complicated to explain to the middle-aged foreigner how to get a ride and transfer to the hotel. So he said, "I'll go back after eating. Do you want to eat together and then leave together? This restaurant's fried tripe is very famous, and it's not pigs, but lamb's fried tripe." Most of the Middle Eastern people were Muslim, so Poplar Fruit explained it to him. The middle-aged foreigner said happily, "Can I? That's a great honor. I came to China not only to travel, but also to taste Chinese food." After waiting in line for more than 10 minutes, they finally waited until there was an empty seat. Poplar Fruit first ordered 2 signature dishes, belly gourd and belly powder dan. The middle-aged foreigner also ordered a few dishes that he thought should be delicious under Poplar Fruit's translation. The dishes were served quickly. In less than 3 minutes after the order was placed, plates of hot dishes were served. "It smells so good," the middle-aged foreigner said with a thumbs up. Under Poplar Fruit's guidance, he began to learn how to use chopsticks. Seeing his 3 fingers awkwardly pinching the chopsticks and the tripe wobbling on the tip of the chopsticks, Poplar Fruit was especially worried that it would fall. Kiki was also attracted by the rich fragrance of the tripe. She began to dance restlessly in Poplar Fruit's arms. Poplar Fruit picked up a piece of lamb tripe and dipped it in the sauce. Kiki waited with her mouth open. In the end, when she saw her father stuffing the tripe into her mouth, Kiki waved her small hands and groaned in dissatisfaction. Her small body twisted to vent her discomfort. "Your child wants to try it too." The middle-aged foreigner gestured to Poplar Fruit and smiled. Poplar Fruit said with a bitter smile, "She likes the smell, but she can't eat it. She's not even a year old yet." The middle-aged foreigner nodded and smiled. "She's so cute." Kiki was so noisy that Poplar Fruit could only put down the delicacies in front of him and think of a countermeasure. Poplar Fruit used the chopsticks to stir the soup in the bowl, letting the soup stain the chopsticks. Then, he stretched the chopsticks in front of Kiki's mouth. Poplar Fruit thought that since she couldn't eat the meat, it should be fine to try the soup. When Chichi saw the chopsticks and smelled the scent that made her drool, she stopped twisting and turning. Her slightly red eyes also stopped the tears that were about to overflow. She sniffed at the chopsticks and then sucked on them. He thought that Chichi would suck on it and refuse to let it go, but Chichi only sucked it for a moment before spitting it out in disgust. She even spat out the saliva in her mouth. Poplar Fruit was caught off guard. Kiki's saliva splashed onto her chin and the round collar of her clothes. Poplar Fruit was angry and amused at the same time. This little fool. He quickly pulled out a tissue and wiped Kiki clean. Poplar Fruit also understood the reason. The lamb tripe soup definitely had the fishy smell of sheep. It was not as fragrant and sweet as milk. It would be a miracle if Kiki liked it. After dealing with Shishi, Yanghua turned around and chatted with the middle-aged foreign man while eating. By the way, sir, I still don't know how to call you. My name is Alan Adham. Chapter 108. My name is Alan Adham. You can call me Alan. The middle-aged foreign man laughed. Poplar Fruit nodded and smiled. Alan, hello. You can call me Leon. After that, Poplar Fruit suddenly felt that something was wrong. He frowned and asked, Mr. Allen, how do you spell your name? It's Alan, A_L_L_E_N, Adham, A_D_H_A_M. Alan gestured and said. Alan Adham, Poplar Fruit said twice in his mouth and finally connected the name with the person in his memory. However, he had only read relevant information before and had not seen photos, so he asked tentatively, Alan? Adham, are you one of the founders of Blizzard? Alan. Adham was also taken aback. He stopped awkwardly eating, raised his head and stared into Poplar Fruit's eyes. He frowned and asked, Who are you? How do you know me? Are you a reporter? Poplar Fruit pointed to himself and his daughter and smiled. Is there a reporter like me? He shook his head. Alan. Adham himself did not believe this inference because he was very low-key in front of the media, and since he quit the management work of Blizzard a few years ago, he had no more news exposure. If Poplar Fruit had planned everything and pretended to be so realistic just to interview him, then it was too realistic. Compared to that unreliable guess, he believed in his intuition more. Poplar Fruit was just a kind person he met on his journey. But how do you know about me? I'm not a big star. Alan Adham asked strangely. Ha. Poplar Fruit laughed. Alan, don't be nervous. I'm really not a reporter, nor am I a crazy fan of yours. Of course, I also admire your road to success. But I recognized you only because of my damn memory. I can memorize a lot of things I have read. For example, I used to read a report about Blizzard, so I remembered your name. I see. Alan Adkin smiled in relief. He struggled to pick up a piece of lamb stomach and threw it into his mouth. While chewing, he said, Don't think of me as someone from Blizzard. The person sitting in front of you is just an ordinary Asian American. Haha, don't worry. Poplar Fruit laughed. I'm actually a translator. Poplar Fruit explained, because of my work, I read a lot of information, so I know more about it. No wonder your English is so good, even better than mine. I thought you grew up in the United States, said Alan, who was relieved. Adhan joked. The two of them chatted as they ate. As they chatted, the topic gradually turned back to the game. Initially, Poplar Fruit talked to him about shooting games. Because many home consoles were unable to enter the Chinese market, many excellent games were unknown to the Chinese. However, when he recommended a game that everyone in China knew, Valve's Counter-Strike, Alan Kuroto was surprised. Adkin suddenly said in disdain, How can that be considered an excellent game? The truly excellent games are at Blizzard. Excellent games are created with great care. How can a poorly made game like Counter-Strike be considered excellent? Poplar Fruit knew that Counter-Strike's special effects were not as good as Blizzard's game. However, it was one of his favorite games. He argued, but Counter-Strike's game design is very good. Its gameplay principles and many maps are still being used by many games to this day. That can only be said to be a classic. It can't be said to be excellent. It wasn't excellent in the past, and it's even less so now. Adkin analyzed Counter-Strike for Poplar Fruit from the perspective of a game designer. Regardless of whether Poplar Fruit had thought of it before, Adkin listed more than 20 shortcomings of Counter-Strike and made Poplar Fruit speechless. Counter-Strike was outdated. That was an indisputable fact. As early as 5 or 6 years ago, Counter-Strike had been withdrawn from mainstream games. There was no place for it except in internet cafes and old players' computers. Yanghua sighed, "You're right. If a good game wants to last for a long time, it does take a long time to polish it." Games like Warcraft, StarCraft, and World of Warcraft are still popular after more than 10 years of development. They can't be separated from the efforts of the game developers behind them. Warcraft was Alan Kuroto's creation. Adkin launched it when he was still the CEO of Blizzard. At the time, he was stuck in the abysmal performance of Diablo. But when it came to Warcraft, Alan Garner was able to take over. However, Adkin made a beautiful comeback in Warcraft. This game was one of his prides. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit talked about Warcraft, Alan Kuroto's face lit up. When Adkin talked about Warcraft, a proud smile appeared on his face. Alan Kuroto was willing to give up his position as CEO and stay as a game consultant. Adkin had a passion for games that went beyond money and everything else. He didn't care what others thought of him, but he cared a lot about what others thought of his games. Poplar Fruit didn't forget to tease him towards the end. "I finally understand why Blizzard is always jumping ship. I think you guys can't even get past your own hurdle, right?" Alan Kuroto laughed. Adhan laughed heartily. "Indeed, we only want to strive for perfection. Every time a new game or new version is released, it must have a breakthrough compared to the past and continue to be an outstanding work of art. If it's not good enough, we'd rather never release it to the market." I agree with your point of view. I think the same about my own translations. I won't allow it to be half-hearted. Poplar Fruit nodded seriously. "But I have a question," Poplar Fruit asked. "Blizzard released StarCraft 2 last year, but there hasn't been any updates for Warcraft. Is it because it's not good enough? But it's been 8 years since it was released. Just updating and maintaining the game's balance will not allow Warcraft to stay at the forefront of the era forever. Warcraft has always been the love and pain in the hearts of Warcraft fans. When it was released, it took the world by storm. The hero concept made it much more interesting and competitive than StarCraft. It was even one of the main events in the World Esports Championships. Unfortunately, in the hands of Blizzard, there hasn't been much change in the past 7 or 8 years. Only now did it gradually withdraw from the world stage. Recently, there have been rumors that Warcraft will be cancelled in the next WCG. How big of a regret is that? Speaking of this, Alan Kuroto's expression changed. Adkin's expression froze, and even his happy expression dimmed a little. He sighed slightly and said, "Sigh, it's not that. It's not that we don't want to release a new version, it's just that we can't find a better breakthrough point for this game. Even if we release a new version, it'll just be a rehash. It won't change much from the past." "Why didn't you buy Dota?" Poplar Fruit asked. "Dota is based on Warcraft. The story is also based on Warcraft. It also has a huge player base. Why did you give up such an excellent game to Valve?" "Alan." Adhan raised his head and took a big gulp of tea. He slowly sighed and said with a bitter smile, "It's not that simple. There are a lot of conflicts of interest. Moreover, I'm not part of the management, so I can't make the decision. If it were me, I would never let go of Dota and leave." Although Adhan wasn't the main designer of Warcraft, that was Rob_Pardo, but he still treated Adhan like his own son, as if he had watched him grow up. How could he not be sad to see it gradually decline? "I really like Warcraft. Out of all the games released by Blizzard, I really like Warcraft." Poplar Fruit said bitterly, "I've always had a deep affection for it. When I first came across the Warcraft expansion pack, I thought it would be interesting, so I flipped through all the backstory novels, the Ancient War trilogy, and so on. I still remember Tyrion's words. Fordring said, 'Race doesn't mean glory. I've seen the noblest orcs, and the most despicable humans.' Towards the end, the sadness turned into a faint nostalgia. Even the classic words in the backstory revealed a deep sense of nostalgia. Alan. Adhan also said with tears in his eyes, "This world no longer needs a guardian like me. The wounds of the earth will slowly recover by itself, and the future of the various races that live here can only depend on their own efforts." Poplar Fruit's eyes lit up and said, "The protector of Azeroth, Medivh." Alan. Adhan smiled and nodded. "The scars of the world will slowly heal, but on this path, we are destined to walk an incomparably difficult path, whether the enemy is a stronger foreign enemy or ourselves." Poplar Fruit murmured. He and Alan. Adhan looked at each other silently, then raised their heads and laughed, attracting the attention of the people around them. Those who didn't know would think that they were drunk. Chichi didn't know why her father was so happy, and she didn't even know why there were tears at the corners of her father's eyes after laughing so hard. She turned her head and stared blankly at her father with her little mouth agape. It was unknown what she was thinking about as well. Although they had known each other for less than an hour, after this long chat, Alan, Adhan, and Poplar Fruit felt like they had known each other for many years. The two of them resonated too much. Their understanding of Warcraft, their familiarity with the history of Warcraft, and their regret for the future of Warcraft were enough to turn them from strangers to good friends who could talk about anything. After returning to the hotel, Poplar Fruit said goodbye to Alan Adhan. He held his phone and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. He had already saved Alan Adhan's number on his phone. Adhan's contact information, but young Guo was thinking about something else. Everyone, use your votes to smash the paw. Chapter 109. After running up and down to buy Zheng Yujie's clothes, Poplar Fruit finally returned to the hotel. He walked to the door and took out the key. Poplar Fruit thought to himself, "I've been out for so long. She can't still be in the bathroom, right? She's probably waiting anxiously." He opened the door and walked into the bedroom. Poplar Fruit saw that the bathroom door was wide open. There were a few puddles of water on the floor. Her wet clothes were thrown in the basin, but there was no one in the bathroom. "Where is she?" Poplar Fruit muttered to himself, full of doubts. However, the entire room was quiet. Kiki was still quietly lying in her own small bed, sleeping. However, there was no trace of Zheng Yujie. She should still be here. Where could she have gone without wearing clothes? If it was in the past, she would definitely be in the room and chattering non-stop. Poplar Fruit sat down on the big bed and scratched his head. He took out his phone and was about to call Zheng Yujie. He raised his phone with his right hand and pressed his left hand on the quilt on the bed. What was that? Poplar Fruit was shocked. His left hand pressed down on something hard. Poplar Fruit moved his butt and lifted the quilt with his left hand. He saw a white and smooth foot. Lifting it up a little more, another foot was revealed. In the darkness of the bed, two beautiful legs that were intertwined with each other were faintly discernible. There was no need to look. Poplar Fruit knew that Zheng Yujie, who he couldn't find no matter how hard he tried, had crawled into his bed. However, he had made such a big move. Why didn't she react at all? Poplar Fruit moved to the front of the bed and gently lifted the quilt. He saw Zheng Yujie's face, which was sleeping like a child. Compared to when he first met her, she was a little thinner. It seemed that Zheng Yujie had been under a lot of pressure during this period of time. She didn't vent to anyone and just silently endured it. Seeing her sleeping so sweetly, Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment and decided not to wake her up. "It doesn't matter. I can change my clothes tomorrow," Poplar Fruit thought. Poplar Fruit's gaze involuntarily followed the lifted blanket downwards. Zheng Yujie's short hair couldn't cover her snow-white, smooth neck. What attracted Poplar Fruit's attention was Zheng Yujie's exquisite collarbone. Her round and delicate skin was like a rare treasure. Poplar Fruit had an impulse to carefully play with it. No. How can it be so evil? Poplar Fruit quickly shook his head and drove the evil thoughts out of his mind. If he really did this, he wouldn't be able to be friends in the future. Zheng Yujie's collarbone was wrapped in a white bathrobe. Although her curves were still very attractive, Poplar Fruit didn't continue to lift the blanket. He gently covered Zheng Yujie with the blanket and then quietly pushed Kiki's small bed out. Poplar Fruit still had to feed and take care of Kiki at night. If Kiki cried, it would disturb Zheng Yujie's rest. It was better to do it in the living room. In any case, Poplar Fruit planned to sleep on the sofa tonight. It was a quiet night. The curtains were pulled open and the room's floor-to-ceiling windows welcomed the bright morning sun without any obstruction. In the warmth of the sun, a figure moved and jumped. His arms were like an eagle flapping its wings, cutting the hazy sunlight into pieces. Kiki also woke up. She was half lying and half sitting in the baby stroller. She stared at the figure with her eyes wide open. Her small mouth formed an O shape. Her small hands were raised in the air, but she didn't move. Poplar Fruit stopped and deeply exhaled a long white breath. He walked out of the hologram and walked towards Kiki with a smile on his face. Kiki began to wave her small hands that she had been preparing for a long time. She grinned and said, "Ha ha, ha ha." Her smile was even more sacred and beautiful than the morning sun. "Daddy, Daddy." Kiki saw Poplar Fruit walk to her side. She stretched out her small hands and called out, "Hehe, not yet." Poplar Fruit picked up the towel hanging on the baby stroller. He wiped his sweat and said with a smile, "Daddy is sweating so much right now. I can't carry you. If I carry you, you'll stink too." Kiki wrinkled her small nose at her father in dissatisfaction. Her small hands danced on her head and said, "Doo-doo." Poplar Fruit was stunned. Kiki began to learn words again. If he guessed correctly, Kiki was learning the word stink. Although the pronunciation was not standard, if Poplar Fruit said it a few more times, she would be able to say it. This made Poplar Fruit vigilant. In the future, he couldn't speak casually in front of his daughter. If Kiki inadvertently learned some of his vulgarities, then it wouldn't be cute. Poplar Fruit boiled a pot of water and prepared to make milk for Kiki when it cooled down. He brewed a pot of tea for himself. The tea was prepared by the hotel. It was oolong tea, and the taste was quite mellow. Poplar Fruit liked it very much. After drinking tea and resting for a while, Poplar Fruit felt that his body was sticky and uncomfortable. He also wanted to take a shower, but the bathroom was in the bedroom. If he took a shower, he would definitely disturb Zheng Yujie. Poplar Fruit thought for a while. Anyway, it was time to wake Zheng Yujie up for breakfast. She didn't eat dinner last night and slept soundly. She was probably very hungry now. Just like in Yangcheng, Poplar Fruit casually pushed open the bedroom door and walked in. He walked around the table and walked to the bed. Poplar Fruit inadvertently glanced at the bed. His eyes widened, and he accidentally bumped into the bedside table. Fortunately, his body was nimble and he managed to dodge in time without making too much noise. Poplar Fruit's brain was not working. He only felt the blood in his body boil. Half of it rushed down, while the other half rushed to his head. At this moment, on the bed, Zheng Yujie was like an octopus wrapped around the blanket like a doll. Her sleeping posture was especially bold. However, this was not the reason why Poplar Fruit's soul was lost. Zheng Yujie was wearing the hotel's bathrobe. The bathrobe was originally short, only covering a small part of her thighs. But with Zheng Yujie's bare teeth and brandished claws while sleeping, the bottom of the bathrobe was pulled open by her thighs. Zheng Yujie's full bum was exposed to the air. Zheng Yujie's skin was really good. It was so smooth and tight that it was almost possible to pinch it until water came out. Poplar Fruit also saw something that he shouldn't have seen. In the place where his eyes stopped, a bright pink flower bloomed in a small black forest. However, there was no morning dew on it. Cough cough. Don't look at it. You shouldn't have seen it. A voice in his head kept warning Poplar Fruit. But he really couldn't move his legs. Although Poplar Fruit had a daughter, this was the first time he saw a real female body under conscious circumstances. Compared to the action movies in Japan and now, it was two completely different things. Plus, after having Kiki, he didn't think about the lower half of his body anymore. So, when some heat accumulated for a long time, Poplar Fruit felt that his head was very hot. There was a burning liquid flowing from his nostrils. He reached out and touched it. It was all red nosebleeds. Poplar Fruit, you can't do this. Poplar Fruit pinched his thigh fiercely. How can you take advantage of me like this? Raising his head, Yangwa tiptoed and jumped out without making any sound. His movement could be said to be without leaving a trace behind. Gently closing the door, Poplar Fruit raised his head and covered his nose as he sat on the sofa. When Kiki saw her father's strange appearance, she was very happy and couldn't stop screaming. After being disturbed by Kiki's childish voice, Poplar Fruit slowly got rid of the exciting scene just now. Poplar Fruit reached out his clean hand, rubbed Kiki's little head, and smiled. Kiki also took the opportunity to reach out her little hand to grab her father, and looked at him with her little nose. Because he had to wipe the nosebleeds, he didn't want to mess around with Kiki. Poplar Fruit carefully withdrew his hand, pulled 5 or 6 pieces of tissue from the table, and first wiped the nosebleeds that had stopped flowing out. Then, he took out a new piece of tissue, wet it with cold water, and wiped the remaining bloodstains. After checking several times in the mirror, Poplar Fruit was relieved. Don't worry, I've destroyed all the evidence. It won't be discovered. Poplar Fruit comforted himself. It seemed that he couldn't go in and wake Zheng Yujie up again. Poplar Fruit changed his method. He directly knocked on the bedroom door and shouted, Yujie, Yujie, wake up. The wooden door was rumbling under Poplar Fruit's tremendous strength. Got it. Got it. No matter how deep in sleep Zheng Yujie was, she was still awakened by Poplar Fruit. She opened her sleepy eyes and propped herself up. Her hair was fluffy, and she shouted at the door, Stop knocking on the door, it's so noisy. The loud noise of the door being torn down finally stopped, and Poplar Fruit's weak voice came from outside the door. Well, the clothes I bought yesterday are on the table. Take them and change. I ordered breakfast. Come out and eat some after you wash up. Got it. You're so annoying. Although she said that, Zheng Yujie's face was blooming with a smile. She was very happy with Poplar Fruit's thoughtfulness. Sitting up, Zheng Yujie looked at her exposed thighs and the messy bathrobe on them. She was stunned for a moment and quickly covered them up. She muttered in her heart, Poplar Fruit didn't see it, did he? Oh, Poplar Fruit is such a bad guy. He's so ugly. Poplar Fruit, who was sitting upright on the sofa outside, inexplicably sneezed. He scratched his head in confusion. Did he catch a cold because he didn't change his clothes after exercising? No. Zheng Yujie, who was still sitting on the bed in the room, touched her beautiful thighs and made a charming expression. How could this blockhead see it? He doesn't even know how to eat meat that's sent to his mouth. A beautiful woman is lying on the bed almost naked, and he ran outside to sleep on the sofa. If he has the guts to come in and look, then he must have seen a ghost. There was a knock on the door, and Poplar Fruit's voice came in again. Well, there was a bra yesterday. I didn't know your size, so I bought 2. Try it on. Got it. Zheng Yujie jumped out of bed, grabbed the clothes Poplar Fruit bought on the table, and ran to the bathroom to change. Running into the bathroom, Zheng Yujie looked up and saw that the big basin of clothes she changed out of last night had been washed clean and hung up to dry. Holding the clothes and covering her mouth, Zheng Yujie didn't know why, but big drops of tears jumped out from the corners of her eyes. They were like a flood that broke the dam and flowed into a river. My heart is obviously warm, so why am I crying? Zheng Yujie asked herself over and over again. In her memory, she had never seen a man who would wash a woman's clothes. Her father, who was in a high position, never did. He didn't even help her mother wash the dishes. It's him. Zheng Yujie shouted in her heart. It's him. If it's destined by the heavens, I won't change it until I die. Everyone, use your votes to buy the poor. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.